Roman 26. Old Mr. Peacock of Serac was dead, and Dr. Kendall was the oldest man in the dale. He was not afraid of death, he was only afraid of dying before Mr. Peacock died. Mama had finished building the rockery in the garden. You had carried all the stones. There were no more stones to carry. That was all that had happened in the year and 9 months since Mark had gone. To you nothing happened. Nothing ever would happen. At 21 and a half you were old too, and very wise. You had given up expecting things to happen. You put 1883 on your letters to Mark and Dan and Roddy, instead of 1882. Then 1884. You measured time by the poems you wrote and by the books you read and by the Sutcliffes, going abroad in January and coming back in March. You had advanced from the critique of pure reason to the critique of practical reason, and the critique of judgment and the prolegomena. And in the end, you were cheated. You would never know the only thing worth knowing. Reality. For all you knew, there was no reality, no God, no freedom, no immortality. Only doing your duty. You can because you ought. Can't, when you got to the bottom of him, was no more exciting than Mama. Du canst while du sollst. Why not you can because you shall. It would never do to let Mama know what can't thought. She would say, your Bible could have told you that. There was Schopenhauer, though. He didn't cheat you. There was Rieni Anschauung, pure perception. It happened when you looked at beautiful things. Beautiful things were crystal. You looked through them and saw reality. You saw God. While the crystal flash lasted, Will und Vorstellung, the will and the idea, were not divided as they are in life. They were one. That was why beautiful things made you happy. And there was Mama's disapproving, reproachful face. Sometimes you felt that you couldn't stand it for another minute. You wanted to get away from it, to the other end of the world, out of the world, to die. When you were dead, perhaps you would know. Or perhaps you wouldn't. Perhaps death would cheat you too. Roman 2. Oh, have I come too soon? She had found Mr. Sutcliffe at his writing table in the library, a pile of papers before him. He turned in his chair and looked at her above the fine, lean hand that passed over his face as if it brushed cobwebs. They didn't tell me you were busy. I'm not. I ought to be, but I'm not. You are. I'll go and talk to Mrs. Sutcliffe till you've finished. No. You'll stay here and talk to me. Mrs. Sutcliffe really is busy. Sewing party. Sewing party. She could see them sitting round the dining room, Mrs. Waugh and Miss Fruin, Mrs. Belk with her busy eyes, and Miss Kendall and Miss Louisa, Mrs. Oldshaw and Dorsey, and Mrs. Horn, the grocer's wife, very stiff in a corner by herself, sewing unbleached calico and hot red flannel, hot sunlight soaking into them. The library was dim and leathery and tobacco-y and cool. The last time she came on a Wednesday, Mrs. Sutcliffe had popped out of the dining room and made them go round to the tennis court by the back, so that they might not be seen from the windows. She wondered why Mrs. Sutcliffe was so afraid of them being seen, and why she had not looked quite pleased. And today there was something about Mr. Sutcliffe. You don't want to play. After tea. When it's cooler. We'll have it in here. By ourselves, he got up and rang the bell. The tea table between them, and she pouring out the tea. She was grown up. Her hair was grown up. It lay like a wreath, plaited on the top of her head. He was smoothing out the wrinkles of one hand with the other, and smiling. Everybody busy, except you and me, Mary. How are you getting on with Kant? I've done with him. It's taken me 4 years. You see, either the German's hard or I'm awfully stupid. German hard, I should imagine. Do you like Kant? I like him awfully when he says exciting things about space and time. I don't like him when he goes maundering on about his old categorical imperative. You can because you ought putting you off, like a clergyman. Kant said that, did he? That shows what an old humbug he was. And it isn't true, Mary, it isn't true. If it was, it wouldn't prove anything. That's what bothers me. What bothers me is that it isn't true. If I did what I ought, I'd be the busiest man in England. I wouldn't be sitting here. If I even did what I want to, you know what I should like to do. To farm my own land, instead of letting it out to these fellows here. I don't suppose you think me clever, but I've got ideas. What sort of ideas? Practical ideas. Ideas that can be carried out. That ought to be carried out because they can. Ideas about cattle breeding, cattle feeding, chemical manuring, housing, labor, wages, everything that has to do with farming. 2 years ago you talked and he listened. Now that you were grown up, he talked to you and you listened. He had said it would make a difference. That was the difference it made. Here I am, a landowner who can't do anything with his land. And I can't do anything for my laborers, Mary. If I keep a dry roof over their heads and a dry floor under their feet, I'm supposed to have done my duty. People will tell you that Mr. Sutcliffe's the great man of the place, but half of them look down on him because he doesn't farm his own land, and the other half kowtow to him because he doesn't, because he's the landlord. And they all think I'm a dangerous man. They don't like ideas. They're afraid of 'em. I'd like to sell every acre I've got here and buy land miles and miles of it that hasn't been farmed before. I'd show them what farming is if you bring brains to it. I see. You could do that. Could I? The land's entailed. I can't sell it away from my son. And he'll never do anything with it. Aren't there other things you could have done? I suppose I could have got the farmers out. Turned them off the land they've sweated their lives into. Or I could have sold my townhouse instead of letting it and bought land. Of course you could. Oh, why didn't you? Why didn't I? Now you've got me. Because I'm a lazy old humbug, Mary. All my farming's in my head when it isn't on my conscience. You don't really like farming, you only think you ought to. What do you really like? Going away. Getting out of this confounded country into the south of France. I'm not really happy, Mary, till I'm pottering about my garden at Agay. She looked where he was looking. 2 drawings above the chimney-piece. A chain of red hills swung out into a blue sea. The Estoril. A pink and white house on the terrace of a hill. House and hill blazing out sunshine. Agay. Agay. Pottering about his garden at Agay. He was happy there. Well, as you can get away. To Agay. Not as much as I should like. My wife can't stand more than 6 weeks of it. So that you aren't really happy at Agay. I thought I was the only person who felt like that. Miserable because I've been doing my own things instead of sewing, or reading to Mama. That's the way conscience makes cowards of us all. If it was even my conscience. But it's Mama's. And her conscience was Grandmamma's. And Grandmamma's. And mine. Isn't yours a sort of landlord's conscience? Your father's? No. No. It's mine all right. My youth had a conscience. Are you sure it wasn't put off with somebody else's? Perhaps. At Oxford, we were all social reformers. The collective conscience of the group, perhaps. I wasn't strong enough to rise to it. Wasn't strong enough to resist it. Don't you do that, my child. Find out what you want, and when you see your chance coming, take it. Don't funk it. I don't see any chance of getting away. Where do you want to get away to? There. Agay. He leaned forward. His eyes glittered. You'd like that. I'd like it more than anything on earth. Then, he said, someday you'll go there. No. Don't let's talk about it. I shall never go. I don't see why not. I don't really see why not. She shook her head. No. That sort of thing doesn't happen. Roman 3. She stitched and stitched, making new underclothing. It was going to happen. Summer and Christmas and the New Year had gone. In another week it would happen. She would be sitting with the Sutcliffes in the Paris-Lyons Mediterranean Express, going with them to Agay. She had to have new underclothing. They would be 2 days in Paris. They would pass in the train, through Dijon, Avignon, Toulon, and Cannes, then back to Agay. She had no idea what it would be like. Only the sounds, Agay rose up out of the other sounds, like a song, a slender foreign song, bright and clear, that you could sing without knowing what it meant. She would stay there with the Sutcliffes, for weeks and weeks, in the pink and white house on the terrace. Perhaps they would go on into Italy. Mr. Sutcliffe was going to send to Cook's for the tickets tomorrow. Expensive, well-fitting clothes had come from Durlingham, so that nothing could prevent it happening. Mr. Sutcliffe was paying for her ticket. Uncle Victor had paid for the clothes. He had kept on writing to Mama and telling her that she really ought to let you go. Aunt Bella and Uncle Edward had written, and Mrs. Draper, and in the end, Mama had given in. At first she had said, "I won't hear of your going abroad with the Sutcliffes," and "the Sutcliffes seem to think they've a right to take you away from me. They've only to say, 'Come,' and you'll go. Then, I suppose you'll have to go, and I don't know what your Uncle Victor thinks they'll do for you, but he shan't say I've stood in your way." And suddenly, her face left off disapproving and reproaching and behaved as it did on Christmas days and birthdays. She smiled now as she sat still and sewed, as she watched you sitting still and sewing, making new underclothes. Aunt Bella would come and stay with Mama, then Aunt Lavy, then Mrs. Draper, so that she would not be left alone. Stitch, stitch. She wondered, supposing they weren't coming. Could she have left her mother alone, or would she have given up going and stayed? No. She couldn't have given it up. She had never wanted anything in her life, as she wanted to go to Agay with the Sutcliffes. With Mr. Sutcliffe. Mrs. Sutcliffe didn't count. She wouldn't do anything at Agay, she would just trail about in the background, kind and smiling, in a shawl. She might almost as well not be there. The happiness was too great. She could not possibly have given it up. She went on stitching. Mama went on stitching. Caddy brought the lamp in. Then Roddy's telegram came. From Queenstown. Been ill. Coming home. Expect me tomorrow. Rodney. She knew then that she would not go to Agay. Roman 4. But not all at once. When she thought of Roddy, it was easy to say quietly to herself, "I shall have to give it up." When she thought of Mr. Sutcliffe and the Paris-Lyons Mediterranee train and the shining, gold-white, unknown towns, it seemed to her that it was impossible to give up going to Agay. You simply could not do it. She shut her eyes. She could feel Mr. Sutcliffe beside her in the train and the carriage rocking. Dijon, Avignon, Cannes. She could hear his voice telling her the names. She would stand beside him at the window and look out. And Mrs. Sutcliffe would sit in her corner and smile at them kindly, glad because they were so happy. "Roddy doesn't say he is ill," her mother said. "I wonder what he's coming home for. Supposing you had really gone. Supposing you were at Agay when Roddy." The thought of Roddy gave her a pain in her heart. The thought of not going to Agay dragged at her waist and made her feel weak, suddenly, as if she were trying to stand after an illness. She went up to her room. The shoulder line of Greffington Edge was fixed across the open window, immovable, immutable. Her knees felt tired. She lay down on her bed, staring at the immovable, immutable white walls. She tried to think of substance, of the reality behind appearances. She could feel her mind battering at the walls of her body, the walls of her room, the walls of the world. She could hear it crying out. She was kneeling now beside her bed. She could see her arms stretched out before her on the counterpane, and her hands, the fingertips together. She pressed her weak, dragging waist tighter against the bed. If anything's there, make me give up going. Make me think about Roddy. Not about myself. About Roddy. Roddy. Make me not want to go to Agay. She didn't really believe that anything would happen. Her mind left off crying. Outside, the clock on the Congregational Chapel was striking 6. She was aware of a sudden checking and letting go, of a black stillness coming on, hushing sound and sight, and the touch of her arms on the rough counterpane, and her breathing and the beating of her heart. There was a sort of rhythm in the blackness that caught you and took you into its peace. When the thing stopped, you could almost hear the click. She stood up. Her white room was gray. Across the window, the shoulder of the hill had darkened. Out there the night crouched, breathing like an immense, quiet animal. She had a sense of exquisite security and clarity and joy. She was not going to Agay. She didn't want to go. She thought, "I shall have to tell the Sutcliffes. Now this evening. And Mama. They'll be sorry and Mama will be glad." But Mama was not glad. Mama hated it when you upset arrangements. She said, "I declare I never saw anybody like you in my life. After all the trouble and expense." But you could see it was Roddy she was thinking about. She didn't want to believe there was anything the matter with him. If you went, that would look as though he was all right. What do you suppose the Sutcliffes will think? And your Uncle Victor? With all those new clothes and that new trunk. He'll understand. Will he? Mr. Sutcliffe, I mean. V. She went down to Greffington Hall that night and told him. He understood. But not quite so well as Mrs. Sutcliffe. She gave you a long look, sighed and smiled. Almost you would have thought she was glad. He didn't look at you. He looked down at his own lean fine hands hanging in front of him. You could see them trembling slightly. And when you were going, he took you into the library and shut the door. Is this necessary, Mary? He said. Yes. We don't quite know what's wrong with Roddy. Then why not wait and see? Because I do know. And Mama doesn't. There's something, or he wouldn't have come home. A long pause. She noticed little things about him. The proud, handsome corners of his mouth had loosened. His eyelids didn't fit nicely as they used to do. They hung slack from the eyebone. You care more for Roddy than you do for Mark, he said. I don't care for him half so much. But I'm sorry for him. You can't be sorry for Mark. Roddy wants me and Mark doesn't. He wants nobody but Mama. He knows what he wants. Well, it's my fault. I should have known what I wanted. I should have taken you a year ago. If you had, she said, it would have been all over now. I wonder, would it? For the life of her, she couldn't imagine what he meant. When she got home, she found her mother folding up the work in the work basket. Well, anyhow, Mama said, you've laid in a good stock of underclothing. Roman 6. She was sitting in the big leather chair in the consulting room. The small gray-white window panes and the black crooked bough of the apple tree across them made a pattern in her brain. Dr. Charles stood before her on the hearthrug. She saw his shark's tooth hanging sharp in the snap of his jaws. He was powerful, savage, and benevolent. He had told her what was wrong with Roddy. What does it mean? The savage light went out of his eyes. They were dull and kind under his red, shaggy eyebrows. It means that you won't have him with you very long, Mary. That Roddy would die. That Roddy would die. Roddy. That was what he had come home for. He ought never to have gone out with his heart in that state. It beats me how he's pulled through those 5 years. 5 weeks of it were enough to kill him. Jem Alderson must have taken mighty good care of him. Jem Alderson. She remembered. The big shoulders, the little screwed-up eyes, the long mustaches, the good gladiator face. Jem Alderson had taken care of him. Jem Alderson had cared. I don't know what your mother could have been thinking of to let him go. Mama doesn't think of things. It wasn't her fault. She didn't know. Uncle Edward and Uncle Victor made him. They ought to be hung for it. They didn't know either. It was my fault. I knew. It seemed to her that she had known all the time, that she remembered knowing. Did he tell you? He didn't tell anybody. Did he know? Yes, Mary. He came to me to be overhauled. I told him he wasn't fit to go. I did try to stop him. Why? He looked at her sharply, as if he were trying to find out something, to fix responsibility. Because I knew. You couldn't have known if nobody told you. I did know. If he dies, I shall have killed him. I ought to have stopped him. I was the only one who knew. You couldn't have stopped him. You were only a child yourself when it happened. If anybody was to blame, it was his mother. It wasn't. She didn't know. Mama never knows anything she doesn't want to know. She can't see that he's ill now. She talks as if he ought to do something. She can't stand men who don't do things like Mark and Dan. What on earth does she suppose he could do? He's no more fit to do anything than my brother James. You'll have to take care of him, Mary. A sharp and tender pang went through her. It was like desire, like the feeling you had when you thought of babies, painful and at the same time delicious. Could you? Said Dr. Charles. Of course I can. If he's taken care of, he might live. She stood up and faced him. How long? I don't know. Perhaps, he went with her to the door. Perhaps, he said, quite a long time. But if he didn't live, she would have killed him. She had known all the time, and she had let him go. Through the dining room window she could see Roddy as he crouched over the hearth, holding out his hands to the fire. He was hers, not Mama's, to take care of. Sharp, delicious pain. Romans 7. Oh, Roddy, look. Little grouse, making nice noises. The nestlings went flapping and stumbling through the roots of the heather. Roddy gazed at them with his fixed and mournful eyes. He couldn't share your excitement. He drew back his shoulders, bracing himself to bear it. His lips tightened in a hard, bleak grin. He grinned at the absurdity of your supposing that he could be interested in anything anymore. Roddy's beautiful face was bleached and sharpened. The sallow mauve-tinted skin stretched close over the bone, but below the edge of his cap, you could see the fine spring of his head from his neck, like the spring of Mark's head. They were in April now. He was getting better. He could walk up the lower slopes of Carva without panting. Why are we ever out? He said. Supposing we went home. All right. Let's. He was like that. When he was in the house, he wanted to be on the moor. When he was on the moor, he wanted to be back in the house. They started to go home, and he turned again towards Carva. They went on till they came to the round pit sunk below the track. They rested there, sitting on the stones at the bottom of the pit. Mary, he said, I can't stay here. I shall have to go back. To Canada, I mean. You shall never go back to Canada, she said. I must. Not to the Aldersons. I can't go there again, because I can't tell you why. But if I could, I wouldn't. I was no good there. They let you know it. Jem. No. He was all right. That beastly woman. What woman? His aunt. She didn't want me there. I wasn't fit for anything but driving cattle and cleaning out their stinking pigsties. She used to look at me when I was eating. You could see she was thinking, he isn't worth his keep. Her mouth had black teeth in it, with horrible gummy gaps between. The women were like that. I wanted to hit her on the mouth and smash her teeth. But of course I couldn't. It's all over. You mustn't think about it. I'm not. I'm thinking about the other thing. The thing I did. And the dog, Mary, the dog. She knew what was coming. You can't imagine what that place was like. Their sheep run was miles from the farm. Miles from anything. You had to take it in turns to sleep there a month at a time, in a beastly hut. You couldn't sleep because of that dog. Jem would give him me. He yapped. You had to put him in the shed to keep him from straying. He yapped all night. The yapping was the only sound there was. It tore pieces out of your brain. I didn't think I could hate a dog. But I did hate him. I simply couldn't stand the yapping. And one night I got up and hung him. I hung him. You didn't, Roddy. You know you didn't. The first time you told me that story, you said you found him hanging. Don't you remember? He was a bad dog. He bit the sheep. Jem's uncle hung him. No. It was me. Do you know what he did? He licked my hands when I was tying the rope round his neck. He played with my hands. He was a yellow dog with a white breast and white paws. And that isn't the worst. That isn't it. The other thing. What I did. I haven't told you that. You couldn't stand me if you knew. It was why I had to go. Somebody must have known. Jem must have known. I don't believe you did anything. Anything at all. I tell you I did. No, Roddy. You only think you did. You only think you hung the dog. They got up out of the pit. They took the track to the schoolhouse lane. A sheep staggered from its bed and stalked away, bleating, with head thrown back and shaking buttocks. Plovers got up, wheeling round, sweeping clothes. Peevit, peevit. Peevit. This damned place is full of noises, Roddy said. Roman 8. The mind can bring it about, that all bodily modifications or images of things may be referred to the idea of God. The book stood open before her on the kitchen table, propped against the scales. As long as you were only stripping the strings from the French beans, you could read. The mind can bring it about. The mind can bring it about. He who clearly and distinctly understands himself and his emotions loves God, and so much the more in proportion as he more understands himself and his emotions. Fine slices of French beans fell from the knife, one by one, into the bowl of clear water. Spinoza's thought beat its way out through the smell of steel, the clean green smell of the cut beans, the crusty, spicy smell of the apple pie you had made. He who loves God cannot endeavor that God should love him in return. Shall we gather at the river? Caddy sang as she went to and fro between the kitchen and the scullery. Caddy was happy now that Maggie had gone, and she had only you and Jesus with her in the kitchen. Through the open door you could hear the clack of the hatchet and the thud on the stone flags as Roddy, with slow, sorrowful strokes, chopped wood in the backyard. Miss Mary, Caddy's thick, loving voice and the jerk of her black eyes warned her. Mama looked in at the door. "Put that book away," she said. She hated the 2 brown volumes of Elwes's Spinoza you had bought for your birthday. "The dinner will be ruined if you read. It'll be ruined if I don't read." For then your mind raged over the saucepans and the fragrant, floury pasteboard, hungry and unfed. It couldn't bring anything about. It snatched at the minutes left over from Roddy and the house, and Mama, and the piano. You knew what every day would be like. You would get up early to practice. When the cooking and the housework was done, Roddy would want you. You would play tennis together with Mr. Sutcliffe and Dorsey Heron. Or you would go up onto the moors and comfort Roddy while he talked about the things he had done in Canada and about getting away and about the dog. You would say over and over again, "You know you didn't hang him. It was Jem's uncle. He was a bad dog. He bit the sheep." In the winter evenings, you would sew or play or read aloud to Mama and Roddy would crouch over the fender with his hands stretched out to the fire, not listening. But Roddy was better. The wind whipped red blood into his cheeks. He said he would be well if it wasn't for the bleating of the sheep, and the crying of the peewits, and the shouting of the damned villagers. And people staring at him. He would be well if he could get away. Then he would be well if he could marry Dorsey. So the first year passed. And the second. And the third year. She was 25. She thought, "I shall die before I'm 50. I've lived half my life and done nothing." Roman 9. Old Dr. Kendall was dead. He had had nothing more to live for. He had beaten Mr. Peacock of Sarrack. Miss Kendall was wearing black ribbons in her cap instead of pink. And Maggie's sister was dead of her cancer. The wall at the bottom of the garden had fallen down, and Roddy had built it up again. He had heaved up the big stones and packed them in mortar. He had laid them true by the plumb line. Blencairn's brother, the stonemason, couldn't have built a better wall. It had all happened in the week when she was ill and went to stay with Aunt Lavie at Scarborough. Yesterday evening, when she got home, Roddy had come in out of the garden to meet her. He was in his shirt sleeves, glass beads of sweat stood out on his forehead, his face was white with excitement. He had just put the last dab of mortar to the last stone. In the blue and white morning, Mary and her mother stood in the garden, looking at the wall. In its setting of clean white cement, Roddy's bit showed like the map of South Africa. They were waiting for him to come down to breakfast. "I must say," Mama said, "he's earned his extra half-hour in bed." She was pleased because Roddy had built the wall up and because he was well again. They had turned. They were walking on the flagged path by the flower border under the house. Mama walked slowly, with meditative pauses and bright, sidelong glances for her flowers. If only, she said, he could work without trampling the flowers down. The sun was shining on the flagged path. Mama was stooping over the bed. She had lifted the stalk of the daffodil up out of the sunk print of Roddy's boot. Caddy was coming down the house passage to the side door. Her mouth was open. Her eyes stared above her high, sallow cheeks. She stood on the doorstep, saying something in a husky voice. "Miss Mary, will you go upstairs to Master Roddy? I think there's something the matter with him. I think..." Upstairs, in his narrow iron bed, Roddy lay on his back, his lips parted, his eyes white slits under half-open, lids turned up to the ceiling. His arms were squared stiffly above his chest, as they had pushed back the bedclothes. The hands had been clenched and unclenched, the fingers still curled in towards the palms. His face had a look of innocence and candor. Caddy's thick, wet voice soaked through his mother's crying. "Miss Mary," he went in his first sleep. His hair's as smooth. X. She was alone with Dan in the funeral carriage. Her heart heaved and dragged with the grinding of the brakes on the hill, the brake of the hearse going in front, the brake of their carriage, the brake of the one that followed with Dr. Charles in it. When they left off, she could hear Dan crying. He had begun as soon as he got into the carriage. She tried to think of Dr. Charles, sitting all by himself in the back carriage, calm and comfortable among the wreaths. But she couldn't. She couldn't think of anything but Dan and the black hearse in front of them. She could see it when the road turned to the right. When she shut her eyes, she could see the yellow coffin inside it, heaped with white flowers, and Roddy lying deep down in the coffin. The sides were made high to cover his arms, squared over his chest as if he had been beating something off. She could see Roddy's arms beating off his thoughts, and under the fine hair Roddy's face, innocent and candid. Dr. Charles said it wasn't that. He had just raised them in surprise. A sort of surprise. He hadn't suffered. Dan's dark head was bowed forward, just above the level of her knees. His deep, hot eyes were inflamed with grief. They kept on blinking, gushing out tears over red lids. He cried like a child, with loud sobs and hiccups that shook him. Her eyes were dry, burning dry, the lids choked with something that felt like hot sand and hurt. If only the carriage didn't smell of brandy. That was the driver. He must have sat in it while he waited. Dan left off crying and sat up suddenly. "What's that hat doing there?" He had taken off his tall hat as he was getting into the carriage and laid it on the empty seat. He pointed at the hat. "That isn't my hat," he said. "Yes, Dank. You put it there yourself." "I didn't. My hat hasn't got a beastly black band on it." He rose violently, knocking his head against the carriage roof. "Here, I must get out of this." He tugged at the window strap, hanging on to it and swaying as he tugged. She dragged him back into his seat. "Sit down and keep quiet." She put her hand on his wrist and held it. Down the road, the bell of Renton Church began tolling. He turned and looked at her unsteadily, his dark eyes showing bloodshot as they swerved. "Mary, is Roddy really dead?" A warm steam of brandy came and went with his breathing. "Yes. That's why you must keep quiet." Mr. Rowlett was standing at the open gate of the churchyard. He was saying something that she didn't hear. Then he swung round solemnly. She saw the flash of his scarlet hood. Then the coffin. She began to walk behind it, between two rows of villagers, between Dorsey Heron and Mr. Sutcliffe. She went, holding Dan tight, pulling him closer when he lurched, and carrying his tall hat in her hand. Close before her face, the head of Roddy's coffin swayed and swung as the bearers staggered. Roddy ought never to have gone to Canada. Her mother had turned again, shaking the big bed. They would sleep together for 3 nights. Then Aunt Bella would come, as she came when Papa died. But your Uncle Victor would have his own way. He didn't know. She thought, but I knew. I knew, and I let him go. Why did I? It seemed to her that it was because, deep down inside her, she had wanted him to go. Deep down inside her, she had been afraid of the unhappiness that would come through Roddy. "And I don't think," her mother said presently, "it could have been very good for him building that wall." "You didn't know." She thought, I'd have known. If I'd been here, it wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have let him. I'd no business to go away and leave him. I might have known. Lord, if thou hadst been here, our brother had not died. The yellow coffin swayed before her eyes, heaped with the white flowers. Yellow and white. Roddy's dog. His yellow dog with a white breast and white paws. And a rope round his neck. Roddy thought he had hanged him. At 7, she got up and dressed and dusted the drawing room. She dusted everything very carefully, especially the piano. She would never want to play on it again. The side door stood open. She went out. In the bed by the flagged path, she saw the sunk print of Roddy's foot and the dead daffodil stalk lying in it. Mama had been angry. She had forgotten that. She had forgotten everything that happened in the minutes before Caddy had come down the passage. She filled in the footprint and stroked the earth smooth above it, lest Mama should see it and remember. Roman 27. I. Potnia nux. Lady, Our Lady Night, you who give sleep to men laboring and suffering out of the darkness, come with your wings, come down on the house of Agamemnon. Time stretched out behind and before you, time to read, to make music, to make poems to translate Euripides, while Mama looked after her flowers in the garden. Mama, sowing and planting and weeding with a fixed, vehement passion. You could hear Caddy and little Alice, Maggie's niece, singing against each other in the kitchen as Alice helped Caddy with her work. You needn't have been afraid. You would never have anything more to do in the house. Roddy wasn't there. Agamemnon, that was where you broke off 2 years ago. He didn't keep you waiting long to finish. You needn't have been afraid. Uncle Victor's letter came on the day when the gentians flowered. 1 minute Mama had been happy, the next she was crying. When you saw her with the letter, you knew. Uncle Victor was sending Dan home. Dan was no good at the office. He had been drinking since Roddy died. 3 months. Mama was saying something as she cried. I suppose he'll be here, then all his life doing nothing. Roman 2. Mama had given Papa's smoking room to Dan. She kept on going in and out of it to see if he was there. When you've posted the letters, you might go and see what Dan's doing. Everybody in the village knew about Dan. The postmistress looked up from stamping the letters to say, your brother was here a minute ago. Mr. Horn, the grocer, called to you from the bench at the fork of the roads. If you're lookin' for your brother, he's just gone oop doll. If Mr. Horn had looked the other way when he saw you coming, you would have known that Dan was in the Buck Hotel. The white sickle of the road, a light at the top of the sickle, the Aldersons' house. A man was crossing from the moor track to the road. He carried a stack of heather on his shoulder, Jem's brother Ned. He stopped and stared. He was thicker and slower than Jem, darker-haired, fuller and redder in the face. He looked at you with the same little, kind, screwed-up eyes. If you're lookin' for your brother, isn't he us long o' us? Wal yo come in. T, Mrs. Medjev yo akupo T. She went in. There was dusk in the kitchen, with a gray light in the square of the window and a red light in the oblong of the grate. A small boy with a toasting fork knelt by the hearth. You disentangled a smell of stewed tea and browning toast from thick, deep smells of peat smoke and the sweat drying on Ned's shirt. When Farmer Alderson got up, you saw the round table, the coarse blue-gray teacups, and the brown glazed teapot on a brown glazed cloth. Dan sat by the table. Dumpling, Ned's 3-year-old daughter, sat on Dan's knee. You could see her scarlet cheeks and yellow hair above the gray frieze of his coat sleeve. His mournful black and white face stooped to her in earnest, respectful attention. He was taking a piece of butterscotch out of the silver paper. Dumpling opened her wet, red mouth. Rachel, Ned's wife, watched them, her lips twisted in a fond, wise smile, as she pressed the big loaf to her breast and cut thick slices of bread and jam. She had made a place for you beside her. She sangs Urson to slape wid a lil song she mocks, Rachel said. Thyle sang that lil song for Mester Dan wanthe. Dumpling hid her face and sang. You had to stoop to hear the cheeping that came out of Dan's shoulder. Ah, dinny die dumplin, die dumplin, die dumplin, dinny die dumplin, die. F Thyle sang for Mester Dan, Farmer Alderson said. Thout sang for tha father wanthe dumplin. Nah. For Graffer then. Nah. Dumpling put her head on one side, butting under Dan's chin like a cat. Dan's arm drew her closer. He was happy there, in the Aldersons' kitchen, holding Dumpling on his knee. There was something in his happiness that hurt you as Roddy's unhappiness had hurt. All your life you had never really known Dan, the queer, scowling boy who didn't notice you, didn't play with you as Roddy played or care for you as Mark had cared. And suddenly you knew him, better even than Roddy, better than Mark. Roman 3. The gray byre was warm with the bodies of the cows, and their grassy, milky breath. Dan, in his clean white shirt sleeves, crouched on Ned's milking stool, his head pressed to the cow's curly red and white flank. His fingers worked rhythmically down the teat, and the milk squirted and hissed and pinged against the pail. Sometimes the cow swung round her white face and looked at Dan. Sometimes she lashed him gently with her tail. Ned leaned against the stall post and watched. Thoughts T-road, thoughts T-road. You're the force stranger she a let milk She's a narvis cow. Teats is tander. When the milking was done, Dan put on his well-fitting coat, and they went home over Carva to the schoolhouse lane. Dan loved the things that Roddy hated. The crying of the peewits, the bleating of the sheep, the shouts of the village children when they saw him and came running to his coat pockets for sweets. He liked to tramp over the moors with the shepherds. He helped them with the dipping and shearing and the lambing. Dan, you ought to be a farmer. I know, he said, that's why they stuck me in an office. Roman 4. If the killer thinks that he kills, if the killed thinks that he is killed, they do not understand. For this one does not kill, nor is that one killed. Passion Week, 2 years after Roddy's death. Roddy's death, the measure you measured time by still. Mama looked up from her Bible. She looked over her glasses with eyes tired of their everlasting reproach. What have you got there, Mary? The Upanishads from the sacred book of the East. TCHTT. It was that Buddhism the other day. Religion. Any religion except your own. Or else it's philosophy. You're destroying your soul, Mary. I shall write to your Uncle Victor and tell him to ask Mr. Sutcliffe not to send you any more books from that library. I'm 27, Mama Ducky. The more shame for you then, her mother said. The clock on the Congregational Chapel struck 6. They put down their books and looked at each other. Dan not back, Mama knew perfectly well he wasn't back. He went to Rayburn. Teat, Mama's chin nodded in queer, vexed resignation. She folded her hands on her knees and waited, listening. Sounds of wheels and of hoofs scraping up the hill. The morph bus back from Rayburn. Caddy's feet running along the passage. The front door opening, then shutting. Dan hadn't come with the bus. Perhaps, Mama said, Ned Anderson'll bring him. Perhaps. There is one eternal thinker, thinking non-eternal thoughts, who, though one, fulfills the desires of many. Mama, why won't you let him go to Canada? It was Canada that killed poor Roddy. It won't kill Dan. He's different. And what good would he be there? If your Uncle Victor can't keep him, who will, I should like to know. Jem Alderson would. He'd take him for nothing. He told Ned he would. To make up for Roddy. Make up. He thinks that's the way to make up. I won't have Dan's death at my door. I'd rather keep him for the rest of my life. How about Dan? Dan's safe here. He's safe on the moor with Alderson looking after the sheep, and he's safe in the cowshed milking the cows. But he isn't safe when Ned drives into Rayburn Market. Would it be safer in Canada? Yes. He'd be 30 miles from the nearest pub. He'd be safer here if you didn't give him money. The boy has to have money to buy clothes. I could buy them. I dare say. You can't treat a man of 30 as if he was a baby of 3. She thought. No. You can only treat a woman. There is one eternal thinker. A knock on the door. There, her mother said, that's Dan. Mary went to the door. Ned Alderson stood outside. He stood slantways, not looking at her. I tried to mock your brother come back long o us, but he would na. Hadn't I better go and meet him? Nah. I would na. I wouldn't worry, there's shepherds on T-road YT sheep. Meb eel tornoop long o they. Don worry f tess lot like. He went away. They waited, listening while the clock struck the hours 7, 8, 9. At 10 her mother and the servants went to bed. She sat up and waited, reading. My son, that subtle essence which you do not perceive there, of that very essence this great Niagara tree exists. That which is the subtle essence, in it all that exists has itself. It is the true. It is the self, and thou, O Svediketu, art it. Substance, the thing in itself, you were it. Dan was it. You could think away your body, Dan's body. One eternal thinker, thinking non-eternal thoughts. Dreaming horrible dreams. Dan's drunkenness. Why? 11. A soft scuffle. The scurry of sheep's feet on the green. A dog barking. The shepherds were back from Rayburn. Feet shuffled on the flagstone. She went to the door. Dan leaned against the doorpost, bent forward heavily, his chin dropped to his chest. Something slimy gleamed on his shoulder and hip. Wet mud of the ditch he had fallen in. She stiffened her muscles to his weight, to the pull and push of his reeling body. Roddy's room. With one lurch, he reached Roddy's white bed in the corner. She looked at the dressing table. A strip of steel flashed under the candlestick. The blue end of a matchbox stuck up out of the saucer. There would be more matches in Dan's coat pocket. She took away the matches and the razor. Her mother stood waiting in the doorway of her room, small and piteous in her nightgown. Her eyes glanced off the razor and blinked. Is Dan all right? Yes. He came back with the sheep. V. The Hedgells had come, the logic. 3 volumes. The bristling Gothic text an ambush of secret, exciting, formidable things. The titles flamed, flags of strange battles, signals of strange ships, challenging, enticing to the dangerous adventure. After the first enchantment, the Buddhist suttas and the Upanishads were no good. Nor yet the Vedanta. You couldn't keep on saying, this is that, and thou art it, or that the self is the dark blue bee and the green parrot with red eyes and the thundercloud, the seasons and the seas. It was too easy, too sleepy, like lying on a sofa and dropping laudanum slowly into a rotten, aching tooth. Your teeth were sound and strong, they had to have something hard to bite on. You wanted to think, to keep on thinking. Your mind wasn't really like a tooth. It was like a robust, energetic body, happy when it was doing difficult and dangerous things, balancing itself on heights, lifting great weights of thought, following the long march into thick, smoky battles. Being and not being are the same, ironic and superb defiance. And then commotion, as if the infinite stillness, the immovable substance, had got up and begun moving rhythm of eternity, the same forever, forever different, forever the same. Thought was the thing in itself. This man was saying, over and over and all the time what you had wanted Kant to say, what he wouldn't say, what you couldn't squeeze out of him, however you turned and twisted him. You jumped to where the name, Spinoza, glittered like a jewel on the large gray page. Something wanting. You knew it and you were afraid. You loved him. You didn't want him to be found out and exposed like Kant. He had given you the first incomparable thrill. Hegel. Spinoza. She thought of Spinoza's murky, mysterious face. It said, I live in you still, as he will never live. You will never love that old German man. He ran away from the cholera. He bolstered up the Trinity with his triple dialectic to keep his chair at Berlin. I refused their bribes. They excommunicated me. You remember. Cursed be Baruch Spinoza in his going out and his coming in. You had tried to turn and twist Spinoza, too, and always he had refused to come within your meaning. His substance, his God stood still in eternity. He, too, before the noisy, rich, exciting Hegel, he drew back into its stillness, pure and cold, a little sinister, a little ironic. And you felt a pang of misgiving, as if, after all, he might have been right. So powerful had been his hold. Dan looked up. What are you reading, Mary? Hegel. Hegel, that's the chap Vickers talks about. Vickers she remembered. Dan lived with Vickers when he left Papa. He's clever, Dan said, but he's an awful ass. Who? Hegel. No. Vickers. You mean he's an awful ass, but he's clever. Roman 6. One Friday evening, an unusual smell of roast chicken came through the kitchen door. Mary put on the slender, long-tailed white gown she wore when she dined at the Sutcliffes. Dan's friend, Lindley Vickers, was sitting on the sofa, talking to Mama. When she came in, he left off talking and looked at her with sudden happy eyes. She remembered Morris Jourdain's disappointed eyes and Mark's. Dan became suddenly very polite and attentive. All through dinner Mr. Vickers kept on turning his eyes away from Mama and looking at her. Every time she looked she caught him looking. His dark hair sprang in two ridges from the parting. His short, high-bridged nose seemed to be looking at you, too, with its wide nostrils alert. His face did all sorts of vivid, interesting things. You wondered every minute whether this time it would be straight and serious or crooked and gay, whether his eyes would stay as they were, black crystals, or move and show gray rings, green speckled. He was alive, running over with life. No, not running over, vibrating with it, holding it in. He looked as if he expected something delightful to happen and waited, excited, ready. He began talking about Hedgel. Plus ka change, plus c'est la même chose. She heard herself saying something. Dan turned and looked at her with a somber, thoughtful stare. Mama smiled and nodded her chin as much as to say, "Did you ever hear such nonsense?" She knew that was the way to stop you. Mr. Vickers's eyes were large and attentive. When you stopped his mouth, gave such a sidelong leap of surprise and amusement that you laughed. Then he laughed. Dan said, "What's the joke?" And Mr. Vickers replied that it wasn't a joke. In the drawing room, Mama said, "I won't have any of those asides between you and Mr. Vickers, do you hear?" Mary thought that so funny that she laughed. She knew what Mama was thinking, but she was too happy to care. Her intelligence had found its mate. You played, and at the first sound of the piano, he came in and stood by you and listened. You had only to play, and you could make him come to you. He would get up and leave Dan in the smoking room. He would leave Mama in the garden. When you played the soft Schubert impromptu, he would sit near you, very quiet. When you played the Appassionata, he would get up and stand close beside you. When you played the loud, joyful Chopin Polonaise, he would walk up and down the room. Saturday evening. Sunday evening. He was going on Monday very early. He sang, "Es ist bestimmt in Gottes Rath, das man vom liebsten, was man hat muss schaden." Dan called out from his corner, "Translate. Let's know what it's all about." He pounded out the accompaniment louder. "We won't, will we?" He jumped up suddenly. "Play the Appassionata." She played and he talked. "I can't play if you talk." "Yes, you can." "I wish I hadn't got to go tomorrow." "Have you, false note, got to go?" "I suppose so." "If Dan asked you, would you stop?" "Yes." He slept in Papa's room. When she heard his door shut, she went to Dan. "Dan, why don't you ask him to stay longer?" "Because I don't want him to." "I thought he was your friend." "He is my friend. The only one I've got." "Then why?" "That's why." He shut the door on her. She got up early. Dan was alone in the dining room. He said, "What have you come down for?" "To give you your breakfasts." "Don't be a little fool. Go back to your room." Mr. Vickers had come in. He stood by the doorway, looking at her and smiling. "Why this harsh treatment?" he said. He had heard Dan. Now and then he smiled again at Dan, who sat sulking over his breakfast. Dan went with him to Durlingham. He was away all night. Next day at dinner time, they appeared again together. Mr. Vickers had brought Dan back. He was going to stay for another week. At the Buck Hotel. Roman 7. Es ist bestimmt in Gottes Rath. He had no business to sing it like that, so that you couldn't get the thing out of your head. That wouldn't have mattered if you could have got his voice out of your heart. It hung there, clawing, hurting. She resented this pain. "Das man vom liebsten was man hat, the dearest that we have, muss she I eden." Her fingers pressed and crept over the keys, in guilty, shamed silence. It would be awful if he heard you playing it, if Dan heard you or Mama. You had only to play, and you could make him come. Supposing you played the Schubert, impromptu she found herself playing it. He didn't come. He wasn't coming. He was going into Rayburn with Dan. And on Monday he would be gone. This time he would really go. When you left off playing, you could still hear him singing in your head. "Das man vom liebsten was man hat. Es ist bestimmt," but if you felt like that about it then. Her hands dropped from the keys. It wasn't possible. He only came on Friday evening last week. This was Saturday morning. 7 days. It couldn't happen in 7 days. He would be gone on Monday morning. Not 10 days. I don't. Something crossing the window pane made her start and turn. Nanny Lyrid's face looking in. Naughty Nanny. You could see her big pink cheeks and her scarlet mouth, and her eyes sliding and peering. Poor pretty, naughty Nanny. Nanny smiled when she met you on the green, as if she trusted you not to tell how you saw her after dark, slinking about the back lane, waiting for young Horn to come out to her. The door opened. Nanny slid away. It was only Mama. Mary, she said, I wish you would remember that Mr. Vickers has come to see Dan, and that he has only got 2 days more. It's all right. He's going into Rayburn with him. I'm sure, her mother said, I wish he'd stay here. She pottered about the room, taking things up and putting them down again. Presently Caddy came for her, and she went out. Mary began to play the Sonata Appassionata. She thought, I don't care if he doesn't come. I want to play it, and I shall. He came. He stood close beside her and listened. Once he put his hand on her arm. Oh no, he said. Not like that. She stood up and faced him. Tell me the truth, shall I ever be any good? Shall I ever play? Do you really want the truth? Of course I do. Her mind fastened itself on her playing. It hid and sheltered itself behind her playing. Let's look at your hands. She gave him her hands. He lifted them. He felt the small bones sliding under the skin. He bent back the padded tips, the joints of the fingers. There's no reason why you shouldn't have played magnificently, he said. Only I don't. I never have. No, you never have. He came closer. She didn't know whether he drew her to him or whether he came closer. A queer, delicious feeling, a new feeling, thrilled through her body to her mouth, to her fingertips. Her head swam slightly. She kept her eyes open by an effort. He gave her back her hands. She remembered. They had been talking about her playing. I knew, she said, it was bad in places. I don't care whether it's bad or good. It's you. The only part of you that can get out. You're very bad in places, but you do something to me all the same. What do I do? You know what you do. I don't. I don't really. Tell me. If you don't know, I can't tell you, dear. He said it so thickly that she was not sure at the time whether he had really said it. She remembered afterwards. There's Dan, she whispered. He swung himself off from her and made himself a rigid figure at the window. Dan stood in the doorway. He was trying to talk as if she wasn't there. I say, aren't you coming to Rayburn? No, I'm not. Why not? I've got a headache. What? Headache? Outside on the flagstones, she saw Nanny pass again and look in. Roman 8. An hour later, she was sitting on the slope under the hill road of Greffington Edge. He lay on his back beside her in the bracken. Lindley Vickers. Suddenly, he pulled himself up into a sitting posture like her own. She was then aware that Mr. Sutcliffe had gone up the road behind them. He had lifted his hat and passed her without speaking. What does Sutcliffe talk to you about? Farming. And what do you do? Listen. Below them, across the dale, they could see the square of Morph on its platform. How long have you lived in that place? 10 years. No, 11. Women, he said, are wonderful. I can't think where you come from. I knew your father, I know Dan and your mother, and Victor Olivier and your aunt. Which aunt? The Unitarian lady, and I knew Marquand Rodney. They don't account for you. Does anybody account for anybody else? Yes. You believe in heredity. I don't know enough about it. You should read Haeckel, The History of Evolution, and Herbert Spencer and Ribot's Heredity. It would interest you. No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't interest you a bit. It sounds as if it would rather. It wouldn't. Look here, promise me you won't think about it, you'll let it alone. Promise me. He was like Jimmy, making you promise not to hang out of top-story windows. No good making promises. Well, he said, there's nothing in it. I wish I hadn't said that about your playing. I only wanted to see whether you'd mind or not. I don't mind. What does it matter? When I'm making music, I think there's nothing but music in all the world. When I'm doing philosophy, I think there's nothing but philosophy in all the world. When I'm writing verses, I think there's nothing but writing in all the world. And when I'm playing tennis, I think there's nothing but tennis in all the world. I see. And when you suffer, you think there's nothing but suffering in all the world. Yes. And when? His face was straight and serious and quiet. His eyes covered her, first her face, then her breasts. She knew he could see her bodice quiver with the beating of her heart. She felt afraid. Then, he said, "You'll not think you'll know." She thought he didn't say it. He won't. He can't. It isn't possible. Hadn't we better go? He sprang to his feet. Much better, he said. Roman 9. She would not see him again that day. Dan was going to dine with him at the Buck Hotel. When Dan came back from Rayburn, he said he wouldn't go. He had a headache. If Vickers could have a headache, so could he. He sulked all evening in the smoking room by himself, but towards 9 o'clock he thought better of it and went round, he said, to look Vickers up. Her mother yawned over her book, and the yawns made her impatient. She wanted to be out of doors, walking, instead of sitting there listening to Mama. At 9 o'clock, Mama gave one supreme yawn and dragged herself to bed. She went out through the orchard into the back lane. She could see Nanny Leroyd sitting on the stone stairs of Horn's granary, waiting for young Horn to come round the corner of his yard. Perhaps they would go up into the granary and hide under the straw. She turned into the field track, to the schoolhouse and the highway. In the dark bottom, the river lay like a broad, white, glittering road. She stopped by the schoolhouse, considering whether she would go up to the moor by the high fields and come back down the lane, or go up the lane and come back down the fields. Too dark to find the gaps if I come back by the fields. She had forgotten the hidden moon. There was a breaking twilight when she reached the lane. She came down at a swinging stride. Her feet went on the grass borders without a sound. At the last crook of the lane, she came suddenly on a man and woman standing in her path by the stone wall. It would be Nanny Leroyd and young Horn. They were fixed in one block, their faces tilted backwards, their bodies motionless. The woman's arms were round the man's neck, his arms round her waist. There was something about the queer back-tilted faces queer and ugly. As she came on, she saw them break loose from each other and swing apart, Nanny Leroyd and Lindley Vickers. She lay awake all night. Her brain, incapable of thought, kept turning round and round, showing her on an endless rolling screen the images of Lindley and Nanny Leroyd, clinging together, loosening, swinging apart, clinging together. When she came down, on Sunday morning breakfast was over. Sunday. She remembered. Last night was Saturday night. Lindley Vickers was coming to Sunday dinner and Sunday supper. She would have to get away somewhere, to Dorsey or the Sutcliffes. She didn't want to see him again. She wanted to forget that she ever had seen him. Her mother and Dan had shut themselves up in the smoking room. She found them there, talking. As she came in, they stopped abruptly and looked at each other. Her mother began picking at the pleats in her gown, with nervous, agitated fingers. Dan got up and left the room. "Well, Mary, you'll not see Mr. Vickers again. He's just told Dan he isn't coming." Then he knew that she had seen him in the lane with Nanny. "I don't want to see him," she said. "It's a pity you didn't think of that before you put us in such a position." She understood Lindley, but she wasn't even trying to understand her mother. The vexed face and picking fingers meant nothing to her. She was saying to herself, "I can't tell Mama I saw him with Nanny in the lane. I oughtn't to have seen him. He didn't know anybody was there. He didn't want me to see him. I'd be a perfect beast to tell her." Her mother went on, "I don't know what to do with you, Mary. One would have thought my only daughter would have been a comfort to me, but I declare you've given me more trouble than any of my children. More than Dan. Dan hadn't a chance. He'd have been different if your poor father hadn't driven him out of the house. He'd be different now if your Uncle Victor had kept him. It's hard for poor Dan if he can't bring his friends to the house any more because of you. Because of me. Because of your folly." She understood. Her mother believed that she had frightened Lindley away. She was thinking of Aunt Charlotte. It would have been all right if she could have told her about Nanny. Then Mama would have seen why Lindley couldn't come. I don't care, she thought. She may think what she likes. I can't tell her. Lindley Vickers had gone. Nothing was left of him but Mama's silence and Dan's, and Nanny's flush as she slunk by and her obscene smirk of satisfaction. Then Nanny forgot him. As if nothing had happened, she hung about Horn's yard and the back lane, waiting for young Horn. She smiled her trusting smile again. As long as you lived in Morph, you would remember. Mary didn't blame her mother and Dan for their awful attitude. She couldn't blink the fact that she had begun to care for a man who was no better than young Horn, who had shown her that he didn't care for her by going to Nanny. If he could go to Nanny, he was no better than young Horn. She thought of Lindley's communion with Nanny as a part of him, essential, enduring. Beside it, her own communion with him was not quite real. She remembered his singing. She remembered playing to him and sitting beside him on the bracken as you remember things that have happened to you a long time ago, if they had really happened. She remembered phrases broken from their context, if they had ever had a context. Does man vom Liebsten was man hat? If you don't know, I can't tell you, dear. And when then you won't think you'll know. She said to herself, I must have been mad. It couldn't have happened. I must have made it up. But if you made up things like that, you were mad. It was what Aunt Charlotte had done. She had lived all her life in a dream of loving and being loved, a dream that began with clergymen and ended with the piano tuner and the man who did the clocks. Mama and Dan knew it. Uncle Victor knew it, and he had been afraid. Morris Jourdain knew it, and he had been afraid. Perhaps Lindley Vickers knew it, too. There must be something in heredity. She thought, if there is, I'd rather face it. It's cowardly not to. Lindley Vickers had told her what to read. Herbert Spencer she knew. Haeckel and Ribot were in the London Library catalogue at Greffington Hall. And Maudsley, she had seen the name somewhere. It was perhaps lucky that Mr. Sutcliffe had gone abroad early this year, for he had begun to follow her through Balzac and Flaubert and Maupassant since when he had sometimes interfered with her selection. The books came down in 2 days. Herbert Spencer's First Principles, The Principles of Biology, The Principles of Psychology, Haeckel's History of Evolution, Maudsley's Body and Mind, Physiology and Pathology of Mind, Responsibility in Mental Disease, and Ribot's Heredity. Your instinct told you to read them in that order, controlling personal curiosity. For the first time in her life, she understood what Spinoza meant by the intellectual love of God. She saw how all things work together for good to those who, in Spinoza's sense, love God. If it hadn't been for Aunt Charlotte and Lindley Vickers, she might have died without knowing anything about the exquisite movements and connections of the live world. She had spent most of her time in the passionate pursuit of things under the form of eternity, regardless of their actual behavior in time. She had kept on for 15 years trying to find out the reality if there was any reality that hid behind appearances, piggishly obtuse to the interest of appearances themselves. She had cared for nothing in them but their beauty and its exciting play on her emotions. When life brought ugly things before her, she faced them with a show of courage, but inwardly she was sick with fear. For the first time she saw the ugliest facts take on enchantment, a secret and terrible enchantment. Dr. Mitchell's ape-faced idiot, Dr. Brown's girl with the goose face and gooseneck, billing her shoulders like a bird. There was something in heredity. But the sheer interest of it made you forget about Papa and Mama and Aunt Charlotte. It kept you from thinking about yourself. You could see why Ribot was so excited about his laws of heredity. They it is that are real. To know a fact thoroughly is to know the quality and quantity of the laws that compose it. Facts are but appearances, laws the reality. There was Darwin's Origin of Species. According to Darwin, it didn't seem likely that anything so useless as insanity could be inherited at all. According to Maudsley and Ribot, it seemed even less likely that sanity could survive. To be sure, after many generations, insanity was stamped out, but not before it had run its course through imbecility to idiocy, infecting more generations as it went. Maudsley was solemn and exalted in his desire that there should be no mistake about it. There is a destiny made for a man by his ancestors, and no one can elude, were he able to attempt it, the tyranny of his organization. You had been wrong all the time. You had thought of your family, Papa and Mama, perhaps Grandpapa and Grandmamma, as powerful but independent and separate entities, in themselves sacred and inviolable, working against you from the outside. Either with open or secret and inscrutable hostility, hindering, thwarting, crushing you down. But always from the outside. You had thought of yourself as a somewhat less powerful, but still independent and separate entity, a sacred, inviolable self, struggling against them for completer freedom and detachment. Crushed down, but always getting up and going on again, fighting a more and more successful battle for your own, beating them in the end. But it was not so. There were no independent, separate entities, no sacred, inviolable selves. They were one immense organism, and you were part of it. You were nothing that they had not been before you. It was no good struggling. You were caught in the net, you couldn't get out. And so were they. Mama and Papa were no more independent and separate than you were. Dan had gone like Papa, but Papa had gone like Grandpapa and Grandmamma Olivier. Nobody ever said anything about Grandpapa Olivier, so perhaps there had been something queer about him. Anyhow, Papa couldn't help drinking any more than Mama could help being sweet and gentle. They hadn't had a choice or a chance. How senseless you had been with your old angers and resentments. Now that you understood, you could never feel anger or resentment anymore. As long as you lived, you could never feel anything but love for them and compassion. Mama, Papa, and Aunt Charlotte, Dan and Roddy, they were caught in the net. They couldn't get out. Dan and Roddy but Mark had got out. Why not you? They were not all alike. Papa and Uncle Victor were different, and Aunt Charlotte and Aunt Lavie. Papa had married and handed it on, he hadn't cared. Uncle Victor hadn't married, he had cared too much, he had been afraid. And Morris Jourdain and Lindley Vickers had been afraid. Everybody who knew about Aunt Charlotte would be afraid, and if they didn't know, you would have to tell them, supposing. You would be like Aunt Lavie. You would live in Morph with Mama for years and years, as Aunt Lavie had lived with Grandmamma. First you would be like Dorsey Heron, then like Louisa Wright, then like Aunt Lavie. No, when you were 45 you would go like Aunt Charlotte. Roman 12. Anyhow, she had filled in the time between October and March, when the Sutcliffes came back. If she could talk to somebody about it but you couldn't talk to Mama, she would only pretend that she hadn't been thinking about Aunt Charlotte at all. If Mark had been there but Mark wasn't there, and Dan would only call you a little fool. Aunt Lavie. She would tell you to love God. Even Aunt Charlotte could tell you that. She could see Aunt Charlotte sitting up in the big white bed and saying, "Love God and you'll be happy," as she scribbled letters to Mr. Marriott and hid them under the bedclothes. Uncle Victor. Uncle Victor was afraid himself. Dr. Charles, he looked at you as he used to look at Roddy. Perhaps he knew about Aunt Charlotte and wondered whether you would go like her. Or if he didn't wonder, he would only give you the iron pills and arsenic he gave to Dorsey. Mrs. Sutcliffe. You couldn't tell a thing like that to Mrs. Sutcliffe. She wouldn't know what you were talking about, or if she did know, she would gather herself up, spiritually, in her shawl and trail away. Mr. Sutcliffe, he would know. If you could tell him, you might take back Maudsley and Ribot and ask him if he knew anything about heredity and what he thought of it. She went to him one Wednesday afternoon. He was always at home on Wednesday afternoons. She knew how it would be. Mrs. Sutcliffe would be shut up in the dining room with the sewing party. You would go in. You would knock at the library door. He would be there by himself, in the big armchair, smoking and reading. The small armchair would be waiting for you on the other side of the fireplace. He would be looking rather old and tired, and when he saw you he would jump up and pull himself together and be young again. The library door closed softly. She was in the room before he saw her. He was older and more tired than you could have believed. He stooped in his chair. His long hands rested on his knees, slackly, as they had dropped there. Gray streaks in the curly lock of hair that would fall forward and be a whisker. His mouth had tightened and hardened. It held out, it refused to become old and tired. "It's Mary," she said. "My dear." He dragged himself to his feet, making his body very straight and stiff. His eyes glistened, but they didn't smile. Only his eyelids and his mouth smiled. His eyes were different. Their blue was shrunk and flattened and drawn back behind the lens. When he moved, pushing forward the small armchair, she saw how lean and stiff he was. "I've been ill," he said. "Oh. I'm all right now." "No. You oughtn't to have come back from Agay." "I never do what I ought, Mary." She remembered how beautiful and strong he used to be, when he danced and when he played tennis, and when he walked up and down the hills. His beauty and his strength had never moved her to anything but a happy, tranquil admiration. She remembered how she had seen Maurice Jourdain tired and old, at 33, and how she had been afraid to look at him. She wondered, was that my fault or his? If I'd cared, should I have minded? If I cared for Mr. Sutcliffe, I wouldn't mind his growing tired and old. The tireder and older he was, the more I'd care. Somehow you couldn't imagine Lindley Vickers growing old and tired. She gave him back the books, Ribot's Heredity and Maudsley's Physiology and Pathology of Mind. He held them in his long, thin hands, reading the titles. His strange eyes looked at her over the tops of the bindings. He smiled. "When did you order these, Mary?" "In October." "That's the sort of thing you do when I'm away, is it?" "Yes, I'm afraid you won't care for them very much." He still stood up, examining the books. He was dipping into Maudsley now and reading him. "You don't mean to say you've read this horrible stuff?" "Every word of it." "I had to." "You had to." "I wanted to know about heredity. And insanity. That's part of it. I wanted to see if there was anything in it. Heredity, I mean. Do you think there is?" She kept her eyes on him. He was still smiling. "My dear child, you know as much as I do. Why are you worrying your poor little head about madness?" "Because I can't help thinking I may go mad. I should think the same if I read Maudsley. I shouldn't be quite sure whether I was a general paralytic or an epileptic homicide. You see, I'm not afraid because I've been reading him. I've been reading him because I was afraid. Not even afraid exactly. As a matter of fact, while you're reading about it, you're so interested that you forget about yourself. It's only when you've finished that you wonder." "What makes you wonder?" He threw Maudsley aside and sat down in the big armchair. "That's just what I don't think I can tell you. You used to tell me things, Mary. I remember a little girl with short hair who asked me whether cutting off her hair would make me stop caring for her." "Not you caring for me." "Precisely. So, if you can't tell me, who can you tell?" "Nobody." "Come then. Is it because of your father? Or Dan?" She thought, after all, I can tell him. "No. Not exactly. But it's somebody. One of Papa's sister's Aunt Charlotte. You see, Mama seems to think I'm rather like her. Does Aunt Charlotte read Kant and Hegel and Schopenhauer to find out whether the thing in itself is mind or matter? Does she read Maudsley and Ribot to find out what's the matter with her mind? I don't think she ever read anything. What did she do? Well, she doesn't seem to have done much but fall in love with people. She'd have been a very abnormal lady if she'd never fallen in love at all, Mary." "Yes, but then she used to think people were in love with her when they weren't." "How old is Aunt Charlotte?" "She must be ages over 50 now." "Well, my dear, you're just 28, and I don't think you've been in love yet." "That's it." "I have." "No. You've only thought you were. Once. Twice, perhaps. You may have been very near it for 10 minutes. But a man might be in love with you for 10 years, and you wouldn't be a bit the wiser if he held his tongue about it." "No. People don't go off their heads because their aunts do, or we should all of us be mad. There's hardly a family that hasn't got somebody with a tile loose." "Then you don't think there's anything in it?" "I don't think there's anything in it in your case. Anything at all. I'm glad I told you." She thought, it isn't so bad. Whatever happens, he'll be here. Roman 13. The sewing party had broken up. She could see them going before her on the road, by the garden wall, by the row of 9 ash trees in the field, round the curve and over Morph Bridge. Bobbing shoulders, craning necks, stiff, nodding heads in funny hats, turning to each other. When she got home, she found Mrs. Waugh and Miss Fruin in the drawing room with Mama. They had brought her the news. The Sutcliffes were going. They were trying to let Greffington Hall. The agent, Mr. Oldshaw, had told Mr. Horne. Mr. Frank, the major, would be back from India in April. He was going to be married. He would live in the London house, and Mr. and Mrs. Sutcliffe would live abroad. Mama said, if their son's coming back, they've chosen a queer time to go away. Roman 14. It couldn't be true. You knew it when you dined with them, when you saw the tranquil Regency faces looking at you from above the long row of Sheraton chairs, the pretty Gainsborough lady smiling from her place above the sideboard. As you sat drinking coffee out of the dark blue coffee cups with gold linings, you knew it couldn't be true. You were reassured by the pattern of the chintzes pink roses and green leaves on a pearl gray ground, by the crystal chains and pendants of the chandelier, by the round black mirror sunk deep in the bowl of its gilt frame. They couldn't go, for if they went, the quiet, gentle life of these things would be gone. The room had no soul apart from the two utterly beloved figures that sat there, each in its own chintz-covered chair. It isn't true, she said, that you're going. She was sitting on the polar bear hearthrug at Mrs. Sutcliffe's feet. Yes, Mary. The delicate, wrinkled hand came out from under the cashmere shawl to stroke her arm. It kept on stroking, a long, loving, slow caress. It made her queerly aware of her arm white and slender under the big puff of the sleeve lying across Mrs. Sutcliffe's lap. He'll be happier in his garden at Agay. She heard herself assenting. He'll be happier, and breaking out. But I shall never be happy again. You mustn't say that, my dear. The hand went on stroking. There's no place on earth, she said, where I'm so happy as I am here. Suddenly the hand stopped, it stiffened, it drew back under the cashmere shawl. She turned her head towards Mr. Sutcliffe in his chair on the other side of the hearthrug. His face had a queer, strained look. His eyes were fixed on the white, slender arm that lay across his wife's lap. And Mrs. Sutcliffe's eyes were fixed on the queer, strained face. Roman 15. Uncle Victor's letter was almost a relief. She had not yet allowed herself to imagine what Morph would be like without the Sutcliffes. And after all, they wouldn't have to live in it. If Dan accepted Uncle Victor's offer, and if Mama accepted his conditions. Uncle Victor left no doubt as to his conditions. He wouldn't take Dan back unless Mama left Morph and made a home for him in London. He wanted them all to live together at 5 Elms. The discussion had lasted from 9:15 till 10:30. Mama still sat at the breakfast table, crumpling and uncrumpling the letter. I wish I knew what to do, she said. Better do what you want, Dan said. Stay here if you want to. Go back to 5 Elms if you want to. But for God's sake, don't say you're doing it on my account. He got up and went out of the room. Goodness knows, I don't want to go back to 5 Elms. But I won't stand in Dan's way. If your Uncle Victor thinks I ought to make the sacrifice, I shall make it. And Dan, Mary said, will make the sacrifice of going back to Victor's office. It would be simpler if he went to Canada. Your uncle can't help him to go to Canada. He won't hear of it. I suppose we shall have to go. They were going. You could hear Mrs. Belk buzzing round the village with the news. The Oliviers are going. One day, Mrs. Belk came towards her, busily, across the green. She stopped to speak, while her little iron-gray eyes glanced off sideways, as if they saw something important to be done. The Sutcliffes were not going, after all. Roman 16. When it was all settled, and she thought that Dan had gone into Rayburn a fortnight ago to give notice to the landlord's solicitors, one evening, as she was coming home from the Aldersons, he told her that he hadn't been to the solicitors at all. He had arranged yesterday for his transport on a cattle ship sailing next week for Montreal. He said he had always meant to go out to Jem Alderson when he had learned enough from Ned. Then why, she said, did you let Mama tell poor Victor? I wanted her to have the credit of the sacrifice, he said. And then, I don't like leaving you here. An awful thought came to her. Are you sure you aren't going because of me? You. What on earth are you thinking of? That time when you wouldn't ask Lindley Vickers to stop on. Oh. I didn't ask him because I knew he wanted to stop altogether. And I don't approve of him. She turned and stared at him. Then it wasn't that you didn't approve of me. What put that in your head? Mama. She told me you couldn't ask anybody again because of me. She said I'd frightened Lindley Vickers away. Like Aunt Charlotte. Dan smiled, a somber, reminiscent smile. You don't mean to say you still take Mama seriously? I never did. But Mark. Or him either. It hurt her like some abominable blasphemy. Romans 17. Nothing would ever happen. She would stay on and morph, she and Mama, without Mark, without Dan, without the Sutcliffes. They were going. They were gone. Roman 28. She lay out on the moor, under the August sun. Her hands were pressed like a bandage over her eyes. When she lifted them, she caught the faint pink glow of their flesh. The light throbbed and nickered as she pressed it out and let it in. The sheep cooshed, panting in the shade of the stone covers. She lay so still that the peewits had stopped their cry. Something bothered her. And in the east one pure prophetic star trembles between the darkness and the dawn. What you wrote last year. No reason why you shouldn't write modern plays in blank verse if you wanted to. Only people didn't say those things. You couldn't do it that way. Let the thing go. Tear it to bits and burn them in the kitchen fire. If you lay still, perfectly still, and stopped thinking the other thing would come back. In dreams he has made you wise with the wisdom of silence and prayer. God, who has blinded your eyes with the dusk of your hair. The mother and son. You and he are near akin. Would you slay your brother in sin? What he does yourself shall do. That was the son's hereditary destiny. Lying on her back under Carva, she dreamed her dream play, saying the unfinished verses over and over again so as to remember them when she got home. She was unutterably happy. She thought, I don't care what happens so long as I can go on. She jumped up to her feet. I must go and see what Mama's doing. Her mother was sewing in the drawing room and waiting for her to come to tea. She looked up and smiled. What are you so pleased about? She said. Oh, nothing. Mama was adorable, sitting there like a dove on its nest, dressed in a dove's dress, gray on gray, turning dove's eyes to you in soft, crinkly lids. She held her head on one side, smiling at some secret that she kept. Mama was happy too. What are you looking such an angel for? Mama lifted up her work, showing an envelope that lay on her lap, the crested flap upwards, a blue gun carriage on a white ground, and the motto, You Beak. Caddy had been into Rayburn to shop and had called for the letters. Mark was coming home in April. Oh, Mama. There's a letter for you, Mary. Not from Mark. If he gets that appointment, he won't go back, she thought. She'll never be unhappy again. She'll never be afraid he'll get cholera. For a minute, their souls met and burned together in the joy they shared. Then broke apart. Aren't you going to show me Mr. Sutcliffe's letter? Why should I? You don't mean to say there's anything in it I can't see. You can see it if you like. There's nothing in it. That was why she hadn't wanted her to see it. For anything there was in it, you might never have known him. But Mrs. Sutcliffe had sent her love. Mama looked up sharply. Did you write to him, Mary? Of course I did. You'll not write again. He's let you know pretty plainly he isn't going to be bothered. It wasn't that. It couldn't be that. Did they say anything more about your going there? No. That ought to show you then. But as long as you live, you'll give yourself away to people who don't want you. I'd rather you didn't talk about them. I should like to know what I can talk about, said Mama. She folded up her work and laid it in the basket. Her voice dropped from the sharp note of resentment. I wish you'd go and see if those Astors have come. Roman 2. The Astors had come. She had carried out the long, shallow boxes into the garden. She had left her mother kneeling beside them, looking with adoration into the large, round, innocent faces, white and purple, mauve and magenta and amethyst and pink. If the asters had not come, the memory of the awful things they had said to each other would have remained with them till bedtime. But Mama would be happy with the asters like a child with its toys, planning where they were to go and planting them. She went up to her room. After 13 years, she had still the same childish pleasure in the thought that it was hers and couldn't be taken from her, because nobody else wanted it. The bookshelves stretched into 3 long rows on the white wall above her bed to hold the books Mr. Sutcliffe had given her. A light blue row for the Thomas Hardys, a dark blue for the George Merediths, royal blue and gold for the Rudyard Kiplings. And in the narrow upright bookcase in the arm of the tea, facing her writing table, Mark's books, the Homers and the Greek dramatists. Their backs had faded from puce color to drab. Mark's books, when she looked at them, she could still feel her old, childish lust for possession, her childish sense of insecurity, of defeat. And something else. The beginning of thinking things about Mama. She could see herself standing in Mark's bedroom at 5 Elms and Mama with her hands on Mark's books. She could hear herself saying, "You're afraid." What did I think Mama was afraid of? Mama was happy out there with the asters. There would be 3 hours before dinner. She began setting down the fragments of the dream play that had come to her, then the outlines. She saw very clearly and precisely how it would have to be. She was intensely happy. She was still thinking of it as she went across the green to the post office, instead of wondering why the postmistress had sent for her, and why Miss Horne waited for her by the house door at the side, or why she looked at her like that, with a sort of yearning pity and fear. She followed her into the parlor, behind the post office. Suddenly she was awake to the existence of this parlor, and its yellow cane-bottomed chairs, and round table with the maroon cloth, and the white alabaster lamp that smelt. The orange envelope lay on the maroon cloth. Miss Horne covered it with her hand. "It's for Mr. Dan," she said. "I daren't send it to the house, lest your mother should get it." She gave it up with a slow, unwilling gesture. "It's bad news, Miss Mary. Your brother died this evening." Her heart stopped, staggered, and went on again. "Puna Mark. Your brother died this evening, Simmons. This evening was yesterday. Mark had died yesterday." Her heart stopped again. She had a sudden feeling of suffocation and sickness. Her mind left off, following the sprawl of the thick gray-black letters on the livid pink form. It woke again to the extraordinary existence of Miss Horne's parlor. It went back to Mark, slowly, by the way it had come, by the smell of the lamp, by the orange envelope on the maroon cloth. Mark. And something else. Mama. She would have to know. Miss Horne still faced her, supporting herself by her spread hands pressed down onto the table. Her eyes had a look of gentle, helpless interrogation, as if she said, "What are you going to do about it?" She did all the necessary things, asked for a telegram form, filled it in, "Send details, Mary Olivier," and addressed it to Simmons of E Company. And all the time, while her hand moved over the paper, she was thinking, "I shall have to tell Mama." Roman 3. The 5 windows of the house stared out at her across the green. She avoided them by cutting through Horne's yard and round by the back lane into the orchard. She was afraid that her mother would see her before she had thought how she would tell her that Mark was dead. She shut herself into her room to think. She couldn't think. She dragged herself from the window seat to the chair by the writing table and from the chair to the bed. She could still feel her heart staggering and stopping. Once she thought it was going to stop altogether. She had a sudden pang of joy. If it would stop altogether, I should go to Mark. Nothing would matter. I shouldn't have to tell Mama that he's dead, but it always went on again. She thought of Mark now without any feeling at all, except that bodily distress. Her mind was fixed in one center of burning, lucid agony. Mama. I can't tell her. I can't. It'll kill her. I don't see how she's to live if Mark's dead. I shall send for Aunt Bella. She can do it. Or I might ask Mrs. Wah. Or Mr. Rowlett. She knew she wouldn't do any of these things. She would have to tell her. She heard the clock strike the half hour. 5:30. Not yet. When it strikes 7, I shall go and tell Mama. She lay down on her bed and listened for the strokes of the clock. She felt nothing but an immense fatigue, an appalling heaviness. Her back and arms were loaded with weights that held her body down onto the bed. I shall never be able to get up and tell her. 6. Half past. At 7, she got up and went downstairs. Through the open side door, she saw her mother working in the garden. She would have to get her into the house. Mama, darling. But Mama wouldn't come in. She was planting the last aster in the row. She went on scooping out the hole for it, slowly and deliberately with her trowel, and patting the earth about it with willful hands. There was a little smudge of gray earth above the crinkles in her soft, sallow white forehead. You wait, she said. She smiled like a child pleased with itself for taking its own way. Mary waited. She thought 3 hours ago I was angry with her. I was angry with her. And Mark was dead then. And when she read his letter, he was dead yesterday. Roman 4. Time was not good to you. Time was cruel. Time made you see. Yet somehow they had gone through time. Nights of August and September, when you got up before daybreak to listen at her door. Days when you did nothing. Mama sat upright in her chair with her hands folded on her lap. She kept her back to the window. You saw her face darkening in the dusk. When the lamp came, she raised her arm and the black shawl hung from it and hid her face. Nights of insane fear when you had to open her door and look in to see whether she were alive or dead. Days when you were afraid to speak, afraid to look at each other. Nights when you couldn't sleep for wondering how Mark had died. They might have told you. They might have told you in one word. They didn't because they couldn't, because the word was too awful. They would never say how Mark died. Mama thought he had died of cholera. You started at sounds, at the hiss of the flame in the grate, the fall of the ashes on the hearth, the tinkling of the front doorbell. You heard Caddy slide back the bolt. People muttered on the doorstep. You saw them go back past the window, quietly, their heads turned away. They were ashamed. You began to go out. You walked slowly, weighted more than ever by your immense, inexplicable fatigue. When you saw people coming, you tried to go quicker. When you spoke to them, you panted and felt absurd. A coldness came over you when you saw Mrs. Waugh and Miss Fruin with their heads on one side and their shocked, grieved faces. You smiled at them as you panted, but they wouldn't smile back. Their grief was too great. They would never get over it. You began to watch for the Indian mail. One day the letter came. You read blunt, jerky sentences that told you Mark had died suddenly, in the mess room, of heart failure. Captain Simmons said he thought you would want to know exactly how it happened. Well, we were cockfighting, if you know what that is, after dinner. Peters is the heaviest man in our battery, and Major Olivier was carrying him on his back. We oughtn't to have let him do it. But we didn't know there was anything wrong with his heart. He didn't know it himself. We thought he was fooling when he dropped on the floor. Everything was done that could be done. He couldn't have suffered. He was happy up to the last minute of his life, shouting with laughter. She saw the long lighted room. She saw it with yellow walls and yellow lights, with a long white table and clear, empty wine glasses. Men in straw-colored bamboo armchairs turning round to look. She couldn't see their faces. She saw Mark's face. She heard Mark's voice, shouting with laughter. She saw Mark lying dead on the floor. The men stood up suddenly. Somebody without a face knelt down and bent over him. It was as if she had never known before that Mark was dead, and knew it now. She cried for the first time since his death, not because he was dead, but because he had died like that playing. He should have died fighting. Why couldn't he? There was the Boer War and the Khyber Pass and Chitral and the Soudan. He had missed them all. He had never had what he had wanted. And Mama, who had cried so much, had left off crying. The poor man couldn't have liked writing that letter, Mary. You needn't be angry with him. I'm not angry with him. I'm angry because Mark died like that. High H, the sound in her mother's throat was like a sigh and a sob, and a laugh jerking out contempt. You don't know what you're talking about. He's gone, Mary. If you were his mother, it wouldn't matter to you how he died so long as he didn't suffer. so long as he didn't die of cholera. If he could have got what he wanted. What's that you say? If he could have got what he wanted. None of us ever get what we want in this world, said Mama. She thought it was her son she loved, not Mark's real, secret self. He's got away from her, at last altogether. She sewed. Every day she went to the linen cupboard and gathered up all the old towels and sheets that wanted mending, and she sewed. Her mother had a book in her lap. She noticed that if she left off sewing, Mama would take up the book and read, and when she began again, she would put it down. Her thoughts went from Mama to Mark, from Mark to Mama. She used to be pleased when she saw you sewing. Nothing will ever please her now. She'll never be happy again. I ought to have died instead of Mark. That's Anthony Trollope she's reading. The long sheet kept slipping. It dragged on her arm. Her arms felt swollen and heavy like bars of lead. She let them drop to her knees. Little Mama. She picked up the sheet again. Why are you sewing, Mary? I must do something. Why don't you take a book and read? I can't read. Well, why don't you go out for a walk? Too tired. You'd better go and lie down in your room. She hated her room. Everything in it reminded her of the day after Mark died. The rows of new books reminded her, and Mark's books in the narrow bookcase. They were hers. She would never be asked to give them back again. Yesterday she had taken out the Aeschylus and looked at it, and she had forgotten that Mark was dead and had felt glad because it was hers. Today she had been afraid to see its shabby drab back, lest it should remind her of that, too. Her mother sighed and put her book away. She sat with her hands before her, waiting. Her face had its old look of reproach and disapproval, the drawn, irritated look you saw when you came between her and Mark. As if your grief for Mark came between her and her grief. As if, deep down inside her, she hated your grief as she had hated your love for him, without knowing that she hated it. Suddenly she turned on you her blurred, wounded eyes. Mary, when you look at me like that, I feel as if you knew everything I'm thinking. I don't. I shall never know. Supposing all the time she knew what you were thinking. Supposing Mark knew. Supposing the dead knew. She was glad of the aching of her heart that dragged her thought down and numbed it. The January twilight crept between them. She put down her sewing. At the stroke of the clock, her mother stirred in her chair. What day of the month is it? She said. The 25th. Then yesterday was your birthday. Poor Mary. I forgot. I sit here thinking. My own thoughts. They make me forget. Come here. She went to her, drawn by a passion stronger than her passion for Mark, her hard, proud passion for Mark. Her mother put up her face. She stooped down and kissed her passionately, on her mouth, her wet cheeks, her dove's eyes, her dove's eyelids. She crouched on the floor beside her, leaning her head against her lap. Mama's hand held it there. Are you 29 or 30? 30. You don't look it. You've always been such a little thing. You remember the silly question you used to ask me. Mama, would you love me better if I was 2? She remembered. Long ago. When she came teasing for kisses. The silly question. You remember that? Yes. I remember. Deep down inside her, there was something you would never know. Roman 29. Mama was planting another row of asters in the garden, in the place of those that had died last September. The outline of the map of South Africa had gone from the wall at the bottom. Roddy's bit was indistinguishable from the rest. And always you knew what would happen. Outside, on the green, the movements of the village repeated themselves like the play of a clockwork toy. Always the same figures on the same painted stand, marked with the same pattern of slanting roads and three-cornered grass plots. Halfway through prayers, the morph bus would break loose from high row with a clatter, and the brakes would grind on the hill. An hour after tea time, it would come back with a mournful tapping and scraping of hoofs. She had left off watching for the old red mail cart to come round the corner at the bottom. Sometimes, at long intervals, there would be a letter for her from Aunt Lavy or Dan or Mrs. Sutcliffe. She couldn't tell when it would come, but she knew on what days the long trolleys would stop by Mr. Horne's yard loaded with powdery sacks of flour, and on what days the brewer's van would draw up to the King's Head and the farmer's arms. When she looked out across the green, she caught the hard stare of the Belks house, the tall, lean, gray house blotched with iron stains. It stood on the sheer edge, where the platform dropped to the turn of the road. Every morning at 10 o'clock, its little door would open, and Mr. Belk would come out and watch for his London paper. Every evening at 10 minutes past 10, the shadow of Mr. Belk would move across the yellow blind of the drawing-room window on the right. The light would go out, and presently a blonde blur would appear behind the blind of the bedroom window on the left. Every morning at 12 Mrs. Belk would hurry along, waddling and shaking, to leave the paper with her aunt, old Mrs. Heron, in the dark cottage that crouched at the top of the green. Every afternoon at 3 Dorsey would bring it back again. When Mary came in from the village, Mama would look up and say, well, as if she expected her to have something interesting to tell. She wished that something would happen so that she might tell Mama about it. She tried to think of something to say that would interest Mama. I met Mr. James on the Garthdale Road. Walking like anything. Did you? Mama was not interested in Mr. James. She wondered, why can't I think of things like other people? She had a sense of defeat, of mournful incapacity. One day Caddy came bustling in with the tea things, looking important. She had brought news from the village. Mrs. Heron had broken her thigh. She had slipped on the landing. Mrs. Belk was with her and wouldn't go away. Caddy tried to look sorry, but you could see she was pleased because she had something to tell you. They talked about it all through tea time. They were sorry for Mrs. Heron. They wondered what poor Dorsey would do if anything should happen to her. And through all their sorrow, there ran a delicate, secret thrill of satisfaction. Something had happened. Something that interested Mama. 2 days later, Dorsey came in with her tail. Her nose was redder, her hare's eyes were frightened. Mrs. Belk's there still, she said. She wants to take Aunt to live with her. She wants her to send me away. She says it wouldn't have happened if I'd looked after her properly. And so it wouldn't, Mary, if I'd been there. But I'd a bad headache, and I was lying down for a minute when she fell. She won't go. She's sitting there in Aunt's room all the time, talking and tiring her. Trying to poison Aunt's mind against me. Working on her to send me away. Dorsey's voice dropped and her face reddened. She thinks I'm after Aunt's money. She's always been afraid of her leaving it to me. I'm only her husband's nephew's daughter. Mrs. Belk's her real niece. I'd go tomorrow, Mary, but Aunt wants me there. She doesn't like Mrs. Belk. I think she's afraid of her. And she can't get away from her. She just lies there with her poor leg in the splints. There's the 4-pound weight from the kitchen scales tied on to keep it on the stretch. If you could see her eyes turning to me when I come. One thing, Mrs. Belk's afraid for her life of me. That's why she's trying to poison Aunt's mind. When they saw Mrs. Belk hurrying across the green to Mrs. Heron's house, they knew what she was going for. Poor Dorsey, they said. Poor Dorsey. They had something to talk to each other about now. Roman 2. Winter and spring passed. The thorn trees flowered on Greffington Edge, dim white groves, magically still under the gray, glassy air. May passed in June. The sleek waves of the hayfields shone with the brushing of the wind, ready for mowing. The elder tree by the garden wall was a froth of greenish-white on green. At the turn of the schoolhouse lane, the flowers began, wild geraniums and rose campion, purple and blue and magenta in a white spray of cow's parsley, standing high against the stone walls, up and up the green lane. Down there, where the 2 dales spread out at the bottom, a tiny Dutch landscape. Flat pastures. Trees dotted about. A stiff row of trees at the end. No sky behind them. Trees green on green, not green on blue. The great flood of the sky dammed off by the hills. She shut her eyes and saw the flat fields of Ilford and the low line of flying trees, a thin, watery mirage against the hill. Since Mark died, she had begun to dream about Ilford. She would struggle and break through out of some dream about Morph and find herself in Leigh Street, going to 5 Elms. She would get past the corner and see the red brick gable end. Sometimes, when she came up to the gate, the house would turn into Greffington Hall. Sometimes it would stand firm with its 3 rows of flat windows. She would go up the flagged path and see the sumac tree growing by the pantry window, and when the door was opening, she would wake. Sometimes the door stood open. She would go in. She would go up the stairs and down the passages, trying to find the schoolroom. She would know that Mark was in the schoolroom. But she could never find it. She never saw Mark. The passages led through empty, grey-lit rooms to the bottom of the kitchen stairs, and she would find a dead baby lying among the boots and shoes in the cat's cupboard. Autumn and winter passed. She was 32. Roman 3. When your mind stopped and stood still, it could feel time. Time going fast, going faster and faster. Every year, its rhythm swung on a longer curve. Your mind stretched to the span of time. There was something exciting about this stretch, like a new sense growing. But in your dreams, your mind shrank again. You were a child remembering and returning, haunting old stairs and passages, knocking at shut doors. This child tried to drag you back. It teased you to make rhymes about it. You were not happy till you had made the rhymes. There was something in you that went on, that refused to turn back, to look for happiness in memory. Your happiness was now, in the moment that you lived, while you made rhymes, while you looked at the white thorn trees, while the black-purple cloud passed over Carva. Yesterday, she had said to Dorsey Heron, "What I can't stand is seeing the same faces every day." But the hill world had never the same face for 5 minutes. Its very form changed as the roads turned. The swing of your stride put in play a vast, mysterious scene shifting that disturbed the sky. Moving through it, you stood still in the heart of an immense being that moved. Standing still, you were moved. You were drawn nearer and nearer to its enclosing heart. She swung off the road beyond the sickle to the last moor track that led to the other side of Carva. She came back by the southern slope, down the 12 fields, past the 4 farms. The farm of the thorn tree, the farm of the ash, the farm of the 3 firs, and the farm all alone. 4 houses, 4 tales to be written. There was something in you that would go on, whatever happened. Whatever happened, it would still be happy. Its happiness was not like the queer, sudden, uncertain ecstasy. She had never known what that was. It came and went. It had gone so long ago that she was sure that whatever it had been, it would never come again. She could only remember its happening, as you remember the faint ecstasies of dreams. She thought of it as something strange and exciting. Sometimes she wondered whether it had really happened, whether there wasn't a sort of untruthfulness in supposing it had. But that ecstasy and this happiness had one quality in common. They belonged to some part of you that was free. A you that had no hereditary destiny, that had got out of the net or had never been caught in it. You could stand aside and look on at its happiness with horror. It didn't care. It was utterly indifferent to your praise or blame, and the praise or blame of other people, or to your happiness and theirs. It was open to you to own it as yourself, or to detach yourself from it in your horror. It was stronger and saner than you. If you chose to set up that awful conflict in your soul, that was your own affair. Perhaps not your own. Supposing the conflict in you was the tug of the generations before you, trying to drag you back to them. Supposing the horror was their horror, their fear of defeat. She had left off being afraid of what might happen to her. It might never happen. And supposing it did, supposing it had to happen when you were 45, you had still 13 years to write in. It shan't happen. I won't let it. I won't let them beat me. Roman 4. Last year, the drawer in the writing table was full. This year, it had overflowed into the top left-hand drawer of the dressing table. She had to turn out all the handkerchiefs and stockings. Her mother met her as she was carrying them to the wardrobe in the spare room. You could see she felt that there was something here that must be inquired into. I should have thought, she said, that writing table drawer was enough. It isn't. T. Mama nodded her head in a sort of exasperated resignation. Do you mean to say you're going to keep all that? All that? You should see what I've burnt. I should like to know what you're going to do with it. So should I. That's just it, I don't know. That night, the monstrous thought came to her in bed. Supposing I published those poems, I always meant to do it someday. Why haven't I? Because I don't care. Or because I care too much. Because I'm afraid. Afraid that if somebody reads them, the illusion they've created would be gone. How do I know my writing isn't like my playing? This is different. There's nothing else. If it's taken from me, I shan't want to go on living. You didn't want to go on living when Mark died. Yet you went on. As if Mark had never died. And if Mama died, you'd go on in your illusion. If it is an illusion, I'd rather know it. How can I know? There isn't anybody here who can tell me. Nobody you could believe if they told you. I can believe myself. I've burnt everything I've written that was bad. You believe yourself today. You believed yesterday. How do you know you'll believe tomorrow? Tomorrow. Aunt Lavie had come to stay. When she came, you had the old feeling of something interesting about to happen. Only you knew now that this was an illusion. She talked to you as though, instead of being 33, you were still very small and very young and ignorant of all the things that really mattered. She was vaguer and grayer, more placid than ever, and more content with God. Impossible to believe that Papa used to bully her, and that Aunt Lavie had revolted. For 33 years, Emilius 33 years. Sunday supper at 5 Elms, on the table James Martineau's endeavors after the Christian life. She wondered why she hadn't thought of Aunt Lavie. Aunt Lavie knew Dr. Martineau. As long as you could remember, she had always given a strong impression of knowing him quite well. But when Mary had made it clear what she wanted her to ask him to do, it turned out that Aunt Lavie didn't know Dr. Martineau at all. And you could see she thought you presumptuous. Romans 6. When old Martha brought the message for her to go to tea with Miss Kendall, Mary slunk out through the orchard into the back lane. At that moment, the prospect of talking 2 hours with Miss Kendall was unendurable. And there was no other prospect. As long as she lived in Morph, there would be nothing apart from her real, secret life. There would be nothing to look forward to but that. If it was not Miss Kendall, it would be Miss Louisa, or Dorsey, or old Mrs. Heron. People talked about dying of boredom who didn't know that you could really die of it. If only you didn't keep on wanting somebody who wasn't there. If before it killed you, you could kill the desire to know another mind, a luminous, fiery crystal, to see it turn, shining and flashing. To talk to it, to listen to it, to love the human creature it belonged to. She envied her youth its capacity for daydreaming, for imagining interminable communions. Brilliant hallucinations of a mental hunger. Better than nothing. If this when on the breaking point must come. Suddenly you would go smash. Smash. Your mind would die in a delirium of hunger. Romans 7. It's a pity we can't go to his lecture, said Miss Kendall. The train was moving out of Rayburn Station. It was awful to think how nearly they had missed it. If Dr. Charles had stayed another minute at the harness makers. Miss Kendall sat on the edge of the seat, very upright in her black silk mantle with the accordion-pleated chiffon frills. She had sat like that since the train began to pull, ready to get out the instant it stopped at Durlingham. I feel sure it's going to be all right, she said. The white marabou feather nodded. Her gentle mauve and sallow face was growing old, with soft curdlings and puckerings of the skin. But she still carried her head high, nodding at you with her air of gaiety, of ineffable intrigue. I wouldn't bring you, Mary, if I didn't feel sure. If she had not felt sure, she wouldn't have put on the gray kid gloves, the mantle, and the bonnet with the white marabou feather. You don't dress like that to go shopping in Durlingham. You mean, Mary said, that we shall see him. Her heart beat calmly, stilled by the sheer incredibility of the adventure. Of course we shall see him. Mrs. Smythe Caulfield will manage that. It might have been a little difficult if the professor had been staying anywhere else. But I know Mrs. Smythe Caulfield very well. No doubt she's arranged for you to have a long talk with him. Does she know what I want to see him about? Well, yes, I thought it best, my dear, to tell her just what you told me, so that she might see how important it is. There's no knowing what may come of it. Did you bring them with you? No, I didn't. If you won't look at them, I should feel such an awful fool." "Perhaps," said Miss Kendall, "it is wiser not to assume beforehand. Nothing may come of it. Still, I can't help feeling something will. When you're famous, Mary, I shall think of how we went into Durlingham together. Whatever comes of it, I shall think of you." The marabou feather quivered slightly. "How long have we known each other?" 17 years. "Is it so long? I shall never forget the first day you came with your mother. I can see you now, Mary, sitting beside my poor father with your hand on his chair. And that evening when you played to us, and dear Mr. Roddy was there." She thought, why can't I be kind always? Kindness matters more than anything. Someday she'll die, and she'll never have said or thought one unkind thing in all her poor, dreadful little life. Why didn't I go to tea with her on Wednesday? On Wednesday, her mind had revolted against its destiny of hunger. She had hated Morph. She had felt angry with her mother for making her live in it, for expecting her to be content, for thinking that Dorsey and Miss Louisa and Miss Kendall were enough. She had been angry with Aunt Lavy for talking about her to Miss Kendall. Yet if it weren't for Miss Kendall, she wouldn't be going into Durlingham to see Professor Lee Ramsden. Inconceivable that she should be taken by Miss Kendall to see Professor Lee Ramsden. Yet this inconceivable thing appeared to be happening. She tried to remember what she knew about him. He was professor of English literature at the University of London. He had edited anthologies and written introductions. He had written a history of English literature from Chaucer to Tennyson and a monograph on Shelley. She thought of his mind as a luminous, fiery crystal, shining. Posters on the platform at Durlingham announced in red letters that Professor Lee Ramsden, M.A., F.R.S.L., would lecture in the town hall at 8 p.m. She heard Miss Kendall saying, "If it had been at 3 instead of 8, we could have gone." She had a supreme sense of something about to happen. Heavenly the long, steep-curved glass roof of the station, the iron arches and girders, the fanlights. Foreign and beautiful the black canal between the purplish rose-red walls, the white swans swaying on the black water, the red shaft of the clock tower. It shot up high out of the marketplace, topped with the fantastically large, round, white eye of its clock. She kept on looking up to the clock tower. At 4 she would see him. They walked about the town. They lunched and shopped. They sat in the park. They kept on looking at the clock tower. At the booksellers in the marketplace, she bought a second-hand copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. A black-gray drive between bushes of smutty laurel and arbutus. A black-gray house of big cut stones that stuck out. Gables and bow windows with sharp freestone facings that stuck out. You waited in a drawing room stuffed with fragile mahogany and sea-green plush. Immense sea-green acanthus leaves, shaded in myrtle green, curled out from the walls. A suggestion of pictures heaved up from their places by this vigorous, thrusting growth. Curtains, cream-colored net, sea-green plush, veiled the black-gray walks and smutty lawns of the garden. While she contemplated these things, the long hand of the white marble tombstone clock moved from the hour to the quarter. She was reading the inscription in black letters on the golden plinth, presented to Thomas Smythe Caulfield, Esker, MP, by the Council and Teachers of St. Paul's Schools, Durlingham, presented when Mrs. Smythe Caulfield came in. A foolish, overblown, conceited face. Gray hair arranged with art and science, curl on curl. 3-cornered eyelids, hutches for small, malevolently watching eyes. A sharp, insolent nose. Fish's mouth peering out above the backward slope of cascading chins. "Mrs. Smythe Caulfield shook hands at a sidelong arm's length, not looking at you, holding Miss Kendall in her sharp, pointed stare. They were Kate and Alina and Kate. "You're going to the lecture." If it had been at 3 instead of 8. The hour was fixed for the townspeople's convenience. In 5 minutes, you had gathered that you would not be allowed to see Professor Lee Ramsden. That Professor Lee Ramsden did not desire to see or talk to anybody except Mrs. Smythe Caulfield, that he kept his best things for her, that all sorts of people were trying to get at him, and that he trusted her to protect him from invasion, that you had been admitted in order that Mrs. Smythe Caulfield might have the pleasure of telling you these things. Mary saw that the moment was atrocious, but it didn't matter. A curious tranquility possessed her. She felt something there, close to her, like a person in the room, giving her a sudden security. The moment that was mattering so abominably to her poor, kind friend belonged to a time that was not her time. She heard the tinkle of teacups outside the hall, then a male voice, male footsteps. "Mrs." Smythe Caulfield made a large encircling movement towards the door. Something interceptive took place there. As they went back down the black-gray drive between the Laurel and Arbutus, Miss Kendall carried her head higher than ever. "That is the first time in my life, Mary, that I've asked a favor." "You did it for me." She hated it, but she did it for me. "Never mind." "We aren't going to mind, are we? We'll do without them." "That's right, my dear." "Laugh." "I'm glad you can." "I dare say I shall laugh myself tomorrow." "I don't want to laugh," Mary said. She could have cried when she looked at the gray gloves and the frilled mantle, and the sad, insulted face in the bonnet with the white marabou feather. And that horrible woman hadn't even given her tea. The enormous eye of the town clock pursued them to the station. As they settled into their seats in the Rayburn train, Miss Kendall said, "It's a pity we couldn't go to the lecture." She leaned back, tired in her corner. She closed her eyes. Mary opened Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The beginning had begun. XXX. What are you reading, Mary? The New Testament. Extraordinary how interesting it is. Interesting. Frightfully interesting. You may say what you like, Mary. You'll change your mind someday. I pray every night that you may come to Christ, and you'll find in the end you'll have to come. No. No. Still, he said, the kingdom of God is within you, if the Greek would bear it within you. Did they understand their Christ? Had anybody ever understood him? Their Prince of Peace, who said he hadn't come to send peace but a sword. The sword of the self. He said he had come to set a man against his father and the daughter against her mother, and that because of him, a man's foes should be those of his own household. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild. He was not meek and mild. He was only gentle with children and women and sick people. He was brave and proud and impatient and ironic. He wouldn't stay with his father and mother. He liked happy people who could amuse themselves without boring him. He liked to get away from his disciples, and from Lazarus and Martha and Mary of Bethany, and go to the rich, cosmopolitan houses and hear the tax-gatherers talk and see the young Roman captains swaggering with their swords and making eyes at Mary of Magdala. He was the sublimest rebel that ever lived. He said, the Spirit blows where it wills. You hear the sound of it, but you can't tell where it comes from or where it goes to. Everybody that is born from the Spirit is like that. The Spirit blows where it wants to. He said it was a good thing for them that he was going away. If he didn't, the Holy Ghost wouldn't come to them. They would never have any real selves. They would never be free. They would set him up as a god outside themselves and worship him, and forget that the kingdom of God was within them, that God was their real self. Their hidden self was God. It was their Savior. Its existence was the hushed secret of the world. Christ knew he must have known it was greater than he was. It was a good thing for them that Christ died. That was how he saved them. By going away. By a proud, brave, ironic death. Not at all the sort of death you had been taught to believe in. And because they couldn't understand a death like that, they went and made a god of him just the same. But the atonement was that Christ's going away. Roman 2. February, gray, black-bellied clouds crawling over Greffington Edge, over Carva, swelling out. Swollen bodies crawling and climbing, coming together, joining. Monstrous bodies ballooning up behind them, mounting on top of them, flattening them out, pressing them down onto the hills, going on, up and up the sky, swelling out overhead, coming together. One cloud, gray as sink water over all the sky, shredded here and there, stirred by slight stretchings and spoutings of thin steam. Then the whole mass coming down, streaming gray sink water. She came down the 12 fields on the south slope of Carva. She could say them by heart. The field with the big gap, the field above the Four Firs farm, the field below the farm of the ash tree, the bare field, the field with the thorn tree, the field with the sheep's well, the field with the wild rose bush, the steep field of long grass, the hillocky field, the haunted field with the ash grove, the field with the big barn, the last field with the gap to the road. She thought of her 34 years, of the verses she had sent to the magazines and how they had come back again, of the 4 farms on the hill, of the 4 tales not written. The wet field grasses swept cold round her ankles. Mama sat waiting in her chair, in the drawing room, in the clear, gray, glassy dusk of the crosslights. She waited for the fine weather to come when she would work again in the garden. She waited for you to come to her. Her forehead unknitted itself, her dove's eyes brightened. She smiled, and the rough feathers of her eyebrows lay down, appeased. At the opening of the door, she stirred in her chair. She was glad when you came. Caddy brought in the lamp. When she turned up the wick, the rising flame carved Mama's face out of the dusk. Her pretty face, delicately dinted, whitened with a powdery down, stained with faint beasters of age. Her little high-bridged nose stood up from the softness, clear and young, firm as ivory. The globed light showed like a ball of fire, hung out in the garden, on the black, glassy darkness behind the pane. Caddy drew down the blind and went. You heard the click of the latch falling to behind her. The evening had begun. They took up their books. Mama hid her face behind Anthony Trollope, Mary hers behind Thomas Hardy. Presently she would hear Mama sigh, then yawn. Horrible tension. Under the edge of her book, she would see Anthony Trollope lying in Mama's lap and Mama's fingers playing with the fringe of her shawl. She would put Thomas Hardy down and take up Anthony Trollope and read aloud, till Mama's head began bowing in a doze. Then she would take up Thomas Hardy. When Mama waked, Hardy would go down under Trollope. When she dozed, he would come to the top again. After supper, Mama would be wide awake. She would sit straight up in her chair, waiting, motionless, ready. You would pick up your book, but you would have no heart in it. You knew what she wanted. She knew that you knew. You could go on trying to read if you chose, but she would still sit there, waiting. You would know what she was thinking of. The green box in the cabinet drawer. The green box. You began to think of it, too, hidden in the cabinet drawer. You were disturbed by the thought of the green box, of the little figures inside it, white and green. You would get up and go to the cabinet drawer. Mama would put out her hands on the table, ready. She smiled with shut lips, pouting, half ashamed, half delighted. You would set out the green and white checkerboard, the rows of pawns. And the game of Halma would begin. White figures leapfrogging over green, green over white. Your hand and your eyes playing, your brain hanging inert, remembering, forgetting. In the pauses of the game you waited. For the clock to strike 10, for Caddy to bring in the Bible and the prayer book, for the evening to end. Old verses, old unfinished verses, coming and going. In the long pauses of the game, when Mama sat stone still, hypnotized by the green and white checkers, her curved hand lifted, holding her pawn, her head quivering with indecision. In dreams, he has made you wise with the wisdom of silence and prayer. Coming and going, between the leapfrogging of the green figures and the white. God, who has blinded your eyes with the dusk of your hair. Brown hair, sleek and thin, brown hair that wouldn't go gray. And the evening would go on, soundless and calm, with soft, annihilating feet, with the soft, cruel feet of oblivion. Roman 3. One day, when she came in, she heard the sound of the piano. The knocking of loose hammers on dead wires, the light, hacking clang of chords rolling like dead drum taps. Droom, droom, droomier a room. Alone in the dusk, Mama was playing the Hungarian march, bowing and swaying as she played. When the door opened, she started up, turning her back on the piano, frightened, like a child caught in a play it is ashamed of. The piano looked mournful and self-conscious. Then suddenly, all by itself, it shot out a cry like an arrow, a pinging, stinging, violently vibrating cry. I'm afraid, Mama said, something's happened to the piano. Roman 4. They were turning out the cabinet drawer when they found the bundle of letters. Mama had marked it in her sharp, three-cornered handwriting, Correspondence Mary. Dear me, she said, I didn't know I'd kept those letters. She slipped them from the rubber band and looked at them. You could see Uncle Victor's on the top, then Morris Jourdain's. You heard the click of her tongue that dismissed those useless, unimportant things. The slim, yellowish letter at the bottom was Miss Lambert's. T. Oh, let me see that. She looked over her mother's shoulder. They read together. We don't want her to go. She made us love her more in one fortnight than girls we've had with us for years. Perhaps someday we may have her again. The poor, kind woman. The kind, dead woman. Years ago dead, her poor voice rising up, a ghost-like wail over your unbelief. That was only the way she began. I say. The thin voice was quivering with praise. Incredible, bewildering praise. Remarkable. You would have thought there had never been such a remarkable child as Mary Olivier. It came back to her. She could see Miss Lambert talking to her father on the platform at Victoria. She could see herself, excited, running up the flagged walk at 5 Elms. And Mama coming down the hall. And what happened then? The shock and all the misery that came after. That was the letter you wouldn't let me read. What do you mean? The day I came back. I asked you to let me read it, and you wouldn't. Really, Mary, you accuse me of the most awful things. I don't believe I wouldn't let you read it. You didn't. I remember. You didn't want me to know. Well, her mother said, giving in suddenly, if I didn't, it was because I thought it would make you even more conceited than you were. I don't suppose I was very well pleased with you at the time. Still, you kept it. But her mother was not even going to admit that she had kept it. She said, I must have overlooked it. But we can burn it now. She carried it across the room to the fire. She didn't want even now. You saw again the old way of it, her little obstinate, triumphant smile, the look that paid you out that said, see how I've sold you. The violet ashen sheet clung to the furred soot of the chimney. You could still see the blenched letters. She couldn't really have thought it would make you conceited. That was only what she wanted to think she had thought. It wasn't easy to make you pleased with me all the time. Still, I can't think why on earth you weren't pleased. She knelt before the fire, watching the violet ashen bit of burnt-out paper, the stupid cause of it all. Her mother had settled again, placidly in her chair. Even if I was a bit conceited. I don't think I was, really. I only wanted to know whether I could do things. I wanted people to tell me just because I didn't know. But even if I was, what did it matter? You must have known I loved you desperately all the time. I didn't know it, Mary. Then you were stup. Oh, say I was stupid. It's what you think. It's what you always have thought. You were, if you didn't see it. See what? How I cared. I can remember when I was a kid, the awful feeling. It used to make me ill. I didn't know that. If you did care, you'd a queer way of showing it. That was because I thought you didn't. Who told you I didn't care for you? I didn't need to be told. I could see the difference. Her mother sat fixed in a curious stillness. She held her elbows pressed tight against her sides. Her face was hard and still. Her eyes looked away across the room. You were different, she said. You weren't like any of the others. I was afraid of you. You used to look at me with your little bright eyes. I felt as if you knew everything I was thinking. I never knew what you'd say or do next. No. Her face wasn't hard. There was something else. Something clear. Clear and beautiful. I suppose I didn't like your being clever. It was the boys I wanted to do things. Not you. Don't, Mama, darling, don't. The stiff, tight body let go its hold of itself. The eyes turned to her again. I was jealous of you, Mary. And I was afraid for my life you'd find it out. 1898. 1899. 1900. 35, 36, 37. 3 years. Her mind kept on stretching. It held 3 years in one span like 1 year. The large rhythm of time appeased and exalted her. In the long summers, while Mama worked in the garden, she translated Euripides. The Bacchae. You could do it after you had read Whitman. If you gave up the superstition of singing, the little tunes of rhyme. If you left off that eternal jingling and listened, you could hear what it ought to be. Something between talking and singing. If you wrote verse that could be chanted, that could be whispered, shouted, screamed as they moved. Agave and her Maenads. Verse that would go with a throbbing beat, excited, exciting, beyond rhyme. That would be nearest to the Greek verse. September 1900. Across the room she could see the pale, buff-colored magazine, on the table where, 5 minutes ago, Mama had laid it down. She could see the black letters of its title and the squat column of the table of contents. The magazine with her poem in it. And Mama, sitting very straight, very still. You would never know what she was thinking. She hadn't said anything. You couldn't tell whether she was glad or sorry, or whether she was afraid. The air tingled with the thought of the magazine with your poem in it. But you would never know what she was thinking. Romans 6. A long letter from Uncle Edward. Uncle Edward was worrying Mama. He never could get on with your poor father. Or your Uncle Victor. He did his best to prevent him being made trustee. And now he comes meddling, wanting to upset all their arrangements. Why? Just because poor Victor's business isn't doing quite so well as it did. Yes, but why's he bothering you about it? Well, he says I ought to make another will, leaving half the boys' money to you. That would be taking it from Dan. He always had a grudge against poor Dan. But you mustn't do anything of the sort. Well, he knows your father provided for you. You're to have the 5 Elms money that's in your Uncle Victor's business. You'd suppose, to hear him talk, that it wasn't safe there. Just tell him to mind his own business, Mary said. Actually, Mama went on, advising me not to pay back any more of Victor's money. I shall tell him I sent the last of it yesterday. There would be no more debts to Uncle Victor. Mark had paid back his Mama had paid back Roddy's, scraping and scraping, Mark and Mama, over 10 years, over 20. A long letter from Uncle Victor. Uncle Victor was worrying Mama. Don't imagine that I shall take this money. I have invested it for you in sound securities. Not in my own business. That, I am afraid I ought to tell you, is no longer a sound security. Poor Victor. It almost looks, Mama said, as if Edward might be right. So right that, in his next letter, Uncle Victor prepared you for his bankruptcy. It will not affect you and Mary, he wrote. I may as well tell you now that all the 5 Elms money has been reinvested, and is safe. As for myself, I can assure you that, after the appalling anxiety of the last 10 years, the thought of bankruptcy is a relief. A blessed relief, Caroline. All through September and October, the long letters came from Uncle Victor. Then Aunt Lavvy's short letter that told you of his death. Then the lawyer's letters. It seemed that, after all, Uncle Victor had been mistaken. His affairs were in perfect order. Only the 5 Elms money was gone, and the money Mark and Mama had paid back to him. He had taken it all out of his own business, and put it into the Sheba Mines and Joe's Reef, and the Golconda Company where he thought it would be safe. The poor dear. The poor dear. Romans 7. So that you knew. Mama might believe what Aunt Lavvy told her, that he had only gone to look out of the window and had turned giddy. Aunt Lavvy might believe that he didn't know what he was doing. But you knew. He had been afraid. Afraid. He wouldn't go up to the top landing after they took Aunt Charlotte away, because he was afraid. Then at last, after all those years, he had gone up. When he knew he was caught in the net and couldn't get out. He had found that they had moved the linen cupboard from the window back into the night nursery. And he had bolted the staircase door on himself. He had shut himself up. And the great bare, high window was there. And the low sill. And the steep, bare wall, dropping to the lane below. End of Book 4. Book 5, Middle Age, 1900-1910. Roman 31. She must have been sitting there 20 minutes. She was afraid to look up at the clock, afraid to move an eyelid lest she should disturb him. The library had the same nice, leathery, tobacco-y smell. Rough under her fingers, the same little sharp tongue of leather scratched up from the arm of her chair. The hanging, half-open fans of the ash tree would be making the same Japanese pattern in the top left-hand pane of the third window. She wanted to see it again to make sure of the pattern, but she was afraid to look up. If she looked up, she would see him. She mustn't. It would disturb him horribly. He couldn't write if he thought you were looking at him. It was wonderful that he could go on like that, with somebody in the room, that he let you sit in it when he was writing. The big man. She had asked him whether she hadn't better go away and come back again, and he had said no, he didn't want her to go away. He wouldn't keep her waiting more than 5 minutes. It was unbelievable that she should be sitting there, in that room, as if nothing had happened, as if they were there, as if they might come in any minute, as if they had never gone. A week ago she would have said it was impossible, she couldn't do it, for anybody, no matter how big or how celebrated he was. Why, after 10 years it must be 10 years she couldn't even bear to go past the house, while other people were in it. She hated them, the people who took Greffington Hall for the summer holidays and the autumn shooting. She would go round to Renton by Jackson's Yard and the field so as not to see it. But when the brutes were gone and the yellow blinds were down in the long rows of windows that you saw above the gray garden wall, she liked to pass it and look up and pretend that the house was only waiting for them, only sleeping its usual winter sleep, resting till they came back. It was 10 years since they had gone. Now, if Richard Nicholson hadn't been Mr. Sutcliffe's nephew, she couldn't, no matter how big and how celebrated he was, or how badly he wanted her help, or she wanted his money. No matter how wonderful and important it would feel to be Richard Nicholson's secretary. It wasn't really his money that she wanted. It would be worth while doing it for nothing, for the sake of knowing him. She had read his Euripides. She wondered, supposing he kept her, how long would it last? He was in the middle of his first series of studies in Greek literature, and there would be 2 or even 3 if he went on. He had taken Greffington Hall for 4 months. When he went back to London, he would have to have somebody else. Perhaps he would tell her that, after thinking it over, he had found he didn't want her. Then today would be the end of it. If she looked up, she would see him. She knew what she would see. The fine, cross upper lip lifted backwards by the mustache, the small, grizzled brown mustache, turned up, that made it look crosser. The narrow, pensive lower lip, thrust out by its light jaw. His nose quite a young nose that wouldn't be Roman, wouldn't be Sutcliffe. It looked out over your head, tilted itself up to sniff the world, obstinate, alert. His eyes, young too, bright and dark, sheltered, safe from age under the low straight eyebrows. They would never have shabby, wrinkled sagging lids. Dark brown hair, gray above his ears, clipped close to stop its curling like his uncle's. He liked to go clipped and clean. You felt that he liked his own tall, straight slenderness. The big library rustled with the quick, irritable sound of his writing. It stopped. He had finished. He looked at the clock. She heard a small commiserating sound. "Forgive me. I really thought it would only take 5 minutes. How on earth do you manage to keep so quiet? I should have known if a mouse had moved." He turned towards her. He leaned back in his chair. "You don't mind my smoking?" He was settling himself. Now she would know. "Well," he said, "if I did keep you waiting 40 minutes, it was a good test, wasn't it?" He meditated. "I'm always changing my secretaries because of something. The last one was admirable, but I couldn't have stood her in the room when I was writing. Besides, you work better." "Can you tell?" "In a week." "Yes. I can tell. Are you sure you can spare me 4 months?" "Easily. 5, 6. If you were still here." "I shan't be. I shall be in London." "Couldn't you come up?" "I couldn't possibly." His cross mouth and brilliant, irritated eyes questioned her. "I couldn't leave my mother." Roman too. 5 weeks of the 4 months gone. And tomorrow he was going up to London. Only till Friday. Only for 5 days. She kept on telling herself he would stay longer. Once he was there, you couldn't tell how many days he might stay. But say he didn't come back till the middle of July, still there would be the rest of July and all August and September. Today he was walking home with her, carrying the books. She liked walking with him, she liked to be seen walking with him, as she used to like being seen walking with Roddy and Mark, because she was proud of them, proud of belonging to them. She was proud of Richard Nicholson because of what he had done. The Morph people didn't know anything about what he had done, but they knew he was something wonderful and important. They knew it was wonderful and important that you should be his secretary. They were proud of you, glad that they had provided him with you, proud that he should have found what he was looking for in Morph. Mr. Belk, for instance, coming along the road. He used to pass you with a jaunty, gallant, curious look as if you were 17 and he were saying, "There's a girl who ought to be married. Why isn't she?" He had just sidled past them, abashed and obsequious, a little afraid of the big man. Even Mrs. Belk was obsequious. And Mr. Spencer Rowlett. He was proud because Richard Nicholson had asked him about a secretary, and he had recommended you. Funny that people could go on disapproving of you for 20 years, and then suddenly approve because of Richard Nicholson. And Mama. Mama thought you wonderful and important too. Mama liked Mr. Nicholson. Ever since that Sunday when he had called and brought the roses and stayed to tea. She had gone out of the room and left them abruptly because she was afraid of his cleverness, afraid that he would begin to talk about something that she didn't understand. And he had said, "How beautiful she is." After he had gone, she had told Mama that Richard Nicholson had said she was beautiful, and Mama had pretended that it didn't matter what he said, but she had smiled all the same. He carried himself like Mr. Sutcliffe when he walked, straight and tall in his clean-cut gray suit. Only he was lighter and leaner. His eyes looked gentle and peaceable, now under the shadow of the Panama hat. The front door stood open. She asked him to come in for tea. "May I?" "What are you doing afterwards?" "Going for a walk somewhere." "Will you let me come too?" He was standing by the window, looking at the garden. She saw him smile when he heard Caddy say that Mama had gone over to Mrs. Was and wouldn't be back for tea. He smiled to himself, a secret, happy smile, looking out into the garden. She took him out through the orchard. He went stooping under the low apple boughs and laughing. Down the back lane and through the gap in the lower fields, along the flagged path to the bottom lane and through the Rathdale fields to the river. Over the stepping stones. She took the stones at a striding run. He followed, running and laughing. Up the Rathdale fields to Renton Moor. Not up the schoolhouse lane, or on the Garthdale road, or along the fields by the beck. Not up Greffington Edge or Carva. Because of Lindley Vickers and Morris Jourdain, and Roddy and Mark. No. She was humbugging herself. Not up Carva because of her secret happiness. She didn't want to mix him up with that, or with the self that had felt it. She wanted to keep him in the clear spaces of her mind, away from her memories, away from her emotions. They sat down on the side of the moor in the heather. Indoors when he was working, he was irritable and restless. You would hear a gentle sighing sound, am, and he would start up and walk about the room. There would be shakings of his head, twistings of his eyebrows, shruggings of his shoulders, and tormented gestures of his hands. But not out here. He sat in the heather as quiet, as motionless as you were, every muscle at rest. His mind was at rest. The strong sunlight beat on him, it showed up small surface signs. Perhaps you could see now that he might really be 40, or even 45. No, you couldn't. You couldn't see or feel anything but the burning, inextinguishable youth inside him. The little gray streaks and patches might have been powder put on for fun. "I want to finish with all my Greek stuff," he said suddenly. "I want to go on to something else studies in modern French literature. Then English. I want to get everything clean and straight in 5 pages where other people would take 50. I want to go smash through some of the traditions. The tradition of the long, gray paragraph. We might learn things from France. But we're a proud island people. We won't learn. We're a proud island people, held in too tight, held in till we burst. That's why we've no aesthetic restraint. No restraint of any sort. Take our economics. Take our politics. We've had to colonize, to burst out over continents. When our minds begin moving, it's the same thing. They burst out. All over the place. When we've learned restraint, we shall take our place inside Europe, not outside it. We do restrain our emotions quite a lot. We do. We do. That's precisely why we don't restrain our expression of them. Really unrestrained emotion that forces its way through and breaks down your intellectual defenses and saturates you with itself, it hasn't any words. It hasn't any words, or very few. The mown fields over there, below Greffington Edge, were bleached with the sun. The gray cliffs quivered in the hot yellow light. It might be somewhere in the south of France. Not Agay. No. Not Agay. The limestone country. I can't think why I never came here. My uncle used to ask me dozens of times. I suppose I funked it. What the poor old chap must have felt like shut up in that house, all those years with my aunt. Please don't. I liked her. You mean you liked him and put up with her because of him? We all did that. She was kind to me. Who wouldn't be? Oh, but you don't know how kind. Kind? Good Lord, yes. There are millions of kind people in the world. It's possible to be kind, and at the same time not entirely brainless. He wouldn't mind that. He wouldn't think she was brainless. He wasn't in love with her, there was another woman, a girl. It was so like the dear old duffer to put it off till he was 45, and then come a cropper over a little girl of 17. That isn't true. I knew him much better than you do. He never cared for anybody but her. Besides, if it was true, you shouldn't have told me. I've no business to know it. Everybody knew it. The poor dear managed so badly that everybody in the place knew it. She knew that's why she dragged him away and made him live abroad. She hated living abroad, but she liked it better than seeing him going to pieces over the girl. I don't believe it. If there was anything in it, I'd have been sure to have heard of it. Why, there wasn't anybody here but me. It must have been years before your time, he said. You could hardly even have come in for the sad end of it. Dorsey Heron said it was true. It was you he was in love with. Everybody saw it but you. She remembered. His face when she came to him. In the library. And what he had said. A man might be in love with you for 10 years, and you wouldn't know about it if he held his tongue. And her face. Her poor face, so worried when people saw them together. And that last night when she stroked your arm, and when she saw him looking at it and stopped. And her eyes. Frightened. Frightened. How I must have hurt him. How I must have hurt them both. Mr. Nicholson had come back on Friday, as he had said. Roman 3. He put down his scratching pen and was leaning back in his chair, looking at her. She wondered what he was thinking. Sometimes the space of the room was enormous between her table by the first tall window and his by the third. Sometimes it shrank and brought them close. It was bringing them close now. You can't see the text for the footnotes, she said. The notes must go in the appendix. She wanted to make herself forget that all her own things, the things she had saved from the last burning, were lying there on his table, staring at her. She was trying not to look that way, not to let herself imagine for a moment that he had read them. Never mind the notes and the appendix. He had got up. He was leaning now against the tall shutter of her window, looking down at her. Why didn't you tell me? Before I let you in for that horrible drudgery. All that typing and indexing, if I'd only known you were doing anything like this. Why couldn't you have told me? Because I wasn't doing it. It was done ages ago. It's my fault. I ought to have known. I did know there was something. I ought to have attended to it and found out what it was. He began walking up and down the room, turning on her again and again, making himself more and more excited. That translation of the Bockiewut made you think of doing it like that. I'd been reading Walt Whitman. It showed me you could do without rhyme. I knew it must sound as if it was all spoken chanted that they mustn't sing. Then I thought perhaps that was the way to do it. Yes. Yes. It is the way to do it. The only way. You see, that's what my Euripides book's about. The very thing I've been trying to ram down people's throats for years. And all the time you were doing it down here all by yourself for fun. I wish I'd known. What are you going to do about it? I didn't think anything could be done. He sat down to consider that part of it. He was going to get it published for her. He was going to write the introduction. And the other things. Oh well, that's another matter. There's not much of it that'll stand. He knew. He would never say more or less than he meant. Not much of it that would stand. Now that she knew, It was extraordinary how little she minded. Still, there are a few things. They must come out first. In the spring. Then the Bacchae in the autumn. I want it to be clear from the start that you're a poet translating, not the other way on. He walked home with her, discussing gravely how it would be done. Roman 4. It had come without surprise, almost without excitement. The quiet happening of something secretly foreseen, present to her mind as long as she could remember. I always meant that this should happen, something like this. Now that it had happened, she was afraid, seeing, but not so clearly, what would come afterwards. Something that would make her want to leave Morph and Mama and go away to London and know the people Richard Nicholson had told her about, the people who would care for what she had done. The people who were doing the things she cared about. To talk to them, to hear them talk. She was afraid of wanting that more than anything in the world. She saw her fear first in Mama's eyes when she told her. And there was something else. Something to do with Richard Nicholson. Something she didn't want to think about. Not fear exactly, but a sort of uneasiness when she thought about him. His mind really was the enormous, perfect crystal she had imagined. It had been brought close to her. She had turned it in her hand and seen it flash and shine. She had looked into it and seen beautiful, clear things in it. Nothing that wasn't beautiful and clear. She was afraid of wanting to look at it again when it wasn't there. Because it had made her happy, she might come to want it more than anything in the world. In 2 weeks it would be gone. She would want it and it would not be there. When she passed the house and saw the long rows of yellow blinds in the gray front, she thought of him. He would not come back. He had never come before, so it wasn't likely he would come again. His being there was one of the things that only happened once. Perhaps those were the perfect things, the things that would never pass away. They would stay forever, beautiful as you had seen them, fixed in their moment of perfection, wearing the very air and light of it forever. You would see them subspecies aeternitatis, under the form of eternity. So that Richard Nicholson would always be like that, the same whenever you thought of him. Look at the others, the ones that hadn't come back and the ones that had. Jimmy Ponsonby, Harry Craven, Mr. Sutcliffe. And Maurice Jourdain and Linley Vickers. If Maurice Jourdain had never come back, she would always have seen him standing in the cornfield. If Linley Vickers had never come back, she wouldn't have seen him with Nanny Learoyd in the schoolhouse lane. The moment when he held her hands in the drawing room, standing by the piano, would have been their one eternal moment. Because Jimmy Ponsonby had gone away, she had never known the awful thing he had done. She would go through the Ilford fields for ever and ever with her hot hand in his, she happy and he innocent, innocent for ever and ever. Harry Craven, her playmate of 2 hours, he would always be playing, always laughing, always holding her hand like Roddy, without knowing that he held it. Suppose Mr. Sutcliffe had come back. She would have hurt them more and more. Mrs. Sutcliffe would have hated her. They would have been miserable, all three. All three damned for ever and ever. She was not sure she wanted Richard Nicholson to come back. She was not sure he wasn't spoiling it by writing. She hadn't thought he would do that. A correspondence. Prolonging the beautiful moment, stretching it thin, thinner and thinner, stretching it so thin that it would snap. You would come to identify him with his letters, so that in the end you would lose what had been real, what had been perfect. You would forget. You would have another, and less real kind of memory. But his letters were not thin, they were as real as his voice. They were his voice talking to you. You could tell which words would take the stress of it. I don't know how much there is of you, whether this is all of it or only a little bit. You gave me an impression, you made me feel that there might be any amount gone under that you can't get at, that you may never get at if you go on staying where you are. I believe if you got clean away, it might come to the top again. But I don't know. I don't know whether you're at the end or the beginning. I could tell better if you were here. She counted the months till April when her poems would come out. She counted the days till Tuesday when there might be a letter from Richard Nicholson. If only he would not keep on telling you ought to come to London. That was what made you afraid. He might have seen how impossible it was. He had seen Mama. Don't try to dig me out of my hole. I can go on living in it forever if I'm never taken out. But if I got out once, it would be awful coming back. It isn't awful now. Don't make it awful. He only wrote, I'll make it awfuler and awfuler until out you come. Roman 32. Things were happening in the village. The old people were dying. Mr. James had died in a fit the day after Christmas Day. Old Mrs. Heron had died of a stroke in the first week of January. She had left Dorsey her house and furniture and £70 a year. Mrs. Belk got the rest. The middle-aged people were growing old. Louisa Wright's hair hung in a limp white fold over each ear. Her face had tight lines in it that pulled it into grimaces. Her eyes had milky white rings like speedwell when it begins to fade. Dorsey Heron's otter brown hair was striped with gray. Her nose stood up sharp and bleak in her red, withering face. Her sharp, tender mouth drooped at the corners. She was 49. It was cruel, cruel, cruel. It hurt you to see them. Rather than own, it was cruel they went about pulling faces and pretending they were happy. Their gestures had become exaggerated, tricks that they would never grow out of, that gave them the illusion of their youth. The old people were dying, and the middle-aged people were growing old. Nothing would ever begin for them again. Each morning when she got out of bed, she had the sacred, solemn certainty that, for her, everything was beginning. At 39. What was 39? A time feeling, a feeling she hadn't got. If you haven't got the feeling, you are not 39. You can be any age you please, 29, 19. But she had been horribly old at 19. She could remember what it had felt like, the desperate, middle-aged sadness, the middle-aged certainty that nothing interesting would ever happen. She had got hold of life at the wrong end. And all the time her youth had been waiting for her at the other end, at the turn of the unknown road, at 39. All through the autumn and winter Richard Nicholson had kept on writing. Her poems would be out on the 10th of April. On the 3rd the note came. Shall I still find you at Morph if I come down this weekend R.N.? You will never find me anywhere else M.O. I shall bike from Durlingham. If you've anything to do in Rayburn, it would be nice if you met me at the King's Head about 4. We could have tea there and ride out together R.N. Roman 2. I'm excited. I've never been to tea in an hotel before. She was chattering like a fool, saying anything that came into her head to break up the silence he made. She was aware of something underneath it, something that was growing more and more beautiful every minute. She was trying to smash this thing, lest it should grow more beautiful than she could bear. You see how I score by being shut up in Morph. When I do get out, it's no end of an adventure. Was there ever such an idiot? Suddenly, she left off trying to smash the silence. The silence made everything stand out with a supernatural clearness. The square, white-clothed table in the bay of the window, the Queen Anne fluting on the Britannia metal teapot, the cups and saucers and plates, white with a gentian blue band, the king's head stamped in gold like a crest. Sitting there so still, he had the queer effect of creating for both of you a space of your own, more real than the space you had just stepped out of. There, and not anywhere else, these supernaturally clear things had reality, a unique but impermanent reality. It would last as long as you sat there, and would go when you went. You knew that, whatever else you might forget, you would remember this. The rest of the room, the other tables, and the people sitting at them were not quite real. They stood in another space, a different and inferior kind of space. I came first of all, he said, to bring you that. He took out of his pocket and put down between them the thin, new white parchment book of her poems. Oh, poor thing, I wonder what'll happen to it. Funny, it was the least real thing. If it existed at all, it existed somewhere else, not in this space, not in this time. If you took it up and looked at it, the clearness, the unique, impermanent reality would be gone, and you would never get it again. They had finished the run down Rayburn Hill. Their pace was slackening on the level. He said, "That's a jolly bicycle of yours." "Isn't it? I'm sure you'll like to know I bought it with the wonderful check you gave me. I should never have had it without that. I'm glad you got something out of that awful time." Awful. It was one of the nicest times I've ever had. Nearly all my nice times have been in that house. I know, he said. My uncle would let you do anything you liked if you were young enough. He ought to have had children of his own. They'd have kept him out of mischief. I can't think, she said to the surrounding hills, why people get into mischief or why they go and kill themselves when they can ride bicycles instead. Roman 3. Mama was sitting upright and averted, with an air of self-conscious effacement, holding the thin white book before her like a fan. Every now and then you could see her face swinging round from behind the cover, and her eyes looking at Richard Nicholson, above the rims of her glasses. Uneasy, frightened eyes. Roman 4. The big pink roses of the chintzes and the gold-bordered bowls of the black mirrors looked at you rememberingly. There was a sort of brutality about it. To come here and be happy, to come here in order to be happy when they were gone, when you had hurt them both so horribly. I'm sitting in her chair, she thought. Richard Nicholson sat, in a purely temporary attitude, by the table in the window. Against the window pane, she could see his side face drawn in a brilliant, furred line of light. His mustache twitched under the shadow of his nose. He was smiling to himself as he wrote the letter to Mama. There was a brutality about that, too. She wondered if he had seen old Baxter's pinched mouth and sliding eyes when he took the letter. He was watching him as he went out, waiting for the click of the latch. It's all right, he said. They expect you. They think it's work. He settled himself in Mr. Sutcliffe's chair. It's the best way, he said. I want to see you and I don't want to frighten your mother. She is afraid of me. No. She's afraid of the whole thing. She wishes it hadn't happened. She's afraid of what'll happen next. I can't make her see that nothing need happen next. She's clever than you think. She sees that something's got to happen next. I couldn't stand another evening like the last. You couldn't, she agreed. You couldn't possibly. We can't exactly go on like this, you know. Don't let's think about it. Here we are. Now this minute. It's an hour and a half till dinner time. Why, even if I go at 9, we've got 3 hours. That's not enough. You talk as though we could think or not think, as we chose. Even if we left off thinking, we should have to go on living. Your mother knows that. I don't think she knows more than we do. She knows enough to frighten her. She knows what I want. I want to marry you, Mary. This, then, was what she had been afraid of. But Mama wouldn't have thought of it. I didn't think you wanted to do that. Why should you? It's the usual thing, isn't it? When you care enough. Do you care enough? More than enough. Don't you? It's no use saying you don't. I know you do. Can you tell? Yes. Do I go about showing it? No, there hasn't been time. You only began yesterday. When? When? In the hotel. When you stopped talking suddenly. And when I gave you your book. You looked as though you wished I hadn't. As though I'd dragged you away from somewhere where you were happy. Yes. If it only began yesterday, we can stop it. Stop it before it gets worse. I can't. I've been at it longer than that. How long? Oh, I don't know. It might have been that first week. After I'd found out that there was peace when you came into the room, and no peace when you went out. When you're there, peace oozes out of you and soaks into me all the time. Does it feel like that? Just like that? But if it feels like that now, we should spoil it by marrying. Oh no, we shouldn't. Yes. If it's peace you want. There won't be any peace. Besides, you don't know. Do you remember telling me about your uncle? What's he got to do with it? And that girl. You said I couldn't have known anything about it. You said I couldn't even have come in for the sad end of it. Well, I did. I was the sad end of it. The girl was me. But you told me it wasn't true. He had got up. He wanted to stand up high above you. You know, he said, you told me it wasn't true. They would have to go through with it. Dining. Drinking coffee. Talking politely, talking intelligently, talking. Villiers de L'Isle Adam, Villiers de L'Isle Adam. The symbolists are finished. Do you know Jean Richepin? Il était une fois un pauvre garce qui aimait celle qui ne l'aimait pas. Le cœur de ta mère pour mon chien, he thinks I lied. You ought to read Henry de Rignier and Ramay de Guermont. You'd like them. Le Coeur de Tamir. He thinks I lied. Goodness knows what he doesn't think. The end of it would come at 9 o'clock. Are you still angry? He laughed. A dreadful sniffling laugh that came through his nostrils. I am not. If I were, I should let you go on thinking I lied. You see, I didn't know it was true. I didn't know I was the girl. You didn't know. How could I when he never said a word? I can't understand your not seeing it. Would you like me better if I had seen it? And no. But I wish you hadn't told me. Why did you? I was only trying to break the shock. You thought I couldn't be old enough to be that girl. I meant you to do a sum in your head. If she was that girl and she was 17, then she must be 39 now. Is that what you smashed up our evening for? Yes. I shouldn't care if you were 59. I'm 45. You're sorry. You're sorry all the same. I'm sorry because there's so little time, Mary. Sorry I'm 6 years older than you. 9 o'clock. She stood up. He turned to her. He made a queer sound. A sound like a deep, tearing sigh. If I were 20, I couldn't marry you because of Mama. That's one thing. You can't marry Mama. We can talk about your mother afterwards. No. Now. There isn't any afterwards. There's only this minute that we're in. And perhaps the next. You haven't thought what it'll be like. You can't leave London because of your work. I can't leave this place because of Mama. She'd be miserable in London. I can't leave her. She hasn't anybody but me. I promised my brother I'd look after her. She'd have to live with me. Why not? You couldn't live with her. I could, Mary. Not you. You said you couldn't stand another evening like yesterday. All the evenings would be like yesterday. Please. Even if there wasn't Mama, you don't want to marry. If you'd wanted to, you'd have done it long ago, instead of waiting till you're 45. Think of two people tied up together for life, whether they both like it or not. It isn't even as if one of them could be happy. How could you if the other wasn't? Look at the Sutcliffes. Think how he hated it. And he was a kind, patient man. You know you wouldn't dream of marrying me if you didn't think it was the only possible way. Well, isn't it? No. The one impossible way. I'd do anything for you but that. Anything. Would you, Mary? Would you have the courage? It would take infinitely more courage to marry you. We should be risking more. All the beautiful things. If it wasn't for Mama. But there is Mama. So you see. She thought, he hasn't kissed me. He hasn't held me in his arms. He'll be all right. It won't hurt him. V. That was Caddy's white apron. Caddy stood on the cobbled square by the front door, looking for her. When she saw them coming, she ran back into the house. She was waiting in the passage as Mary came in. The mistress is upset about something, she said. After she got Mr. Nicholson's letter. There wasn't anything to upset her in that, Caddy. Perhaps not, Miss Mary, but I thought I'd tell you. Mama had been crying all evening. Her pocket handkerchief lay in her lap, a wet rag. I thought you were never coming back again, she said. Why, where did you think I'd gone? Goodness knows where. I believe there's nothing you wouldn't do. I've no security with you, Mary. Staying out till all hours of the night. Sitting up with that man. You'll be the talk of the place if you don't take care. She thought, I must let her go on. I won't say anything. If I do, it'll be terrible. I can't think what possessed you. Why did I do it? Why did I smash it all up? Uncle Victor suicided. That's what I've done. I've killed myself. This isn't me. If that's what comes of your publishing, I'd rather your books were sunk to the bottom of the sea. I'd rather see you in your coffin. I am in my coffin. I wish I were in mine, her mother said. Mama was getting up from her chair, raising herself slowly by her arms. Mary stooped to pick up the pocket handkerchief. Don't, Mama, I've got it. Mama went on stooping. Sinking, sliding down sideways, clutching at the edge of the table. Mary saw terror, bright animal terror, darting up to her out of Mama's eyes, and in a place by themselves, the cloth sliding, the lamp rocking and righting itself. She was dragging her up by her armpits, holding her up. Mama's arms were dangling like doll's arms. And like a machine wound up like a child in a passion, she still struggled to walk, her knees thrust out, doubled up, giving way, her feet trailing. Roman 6. Not a stroke. Well, only a slight stroke, a threatening, a warning. Remember, she's getting old, Mary. Any little worry or excitement would do it. She was worried and excited about me. Richard worried and excited her. If I could only stay awake till she sleeps. She's lying there like a lamb, calling me dear and afraid of giving me trouble. Her little hands dragged the bedclothes up to her chin when Dr. Charles came. She looked at him with her bright, terrified eyes. She isn't old. She can't be when her eyes are so bright. She thinks it's a stroke. She won't believe him. She thinks she'll die like Mrs. Heron. Perhaps she knows. Perhaps Dr. Charles really thinks she'll die and won't tell me. Richard thought it. He was sorry and gentle because he knew. You could see by his cleared, smoothed face and that dreadfully kind, dreadfully wise look. He gave in to everything with an air of insincere, provisional acquiescence, as if he knew it couldn't be for very long. Dr. Charles must have told him. Richard wants it to happen. Richard's wanting it can't make it happen. It might, though. Richard might get at her. His mind and will might be getting at her all the time, making her die. He might do it without knowing he was doing it, because he couldn't help it. He might do it in his sleep. But I can stop that. If Richard's mind and will can make her die, my mind and will can keep her from dying. There was something I did before. That time, I wanted to go away with the Sutcliffes. When Roddy was coming home. Something happened then. If it happened then, it can happen now. If I could remember how you do it. Flat on your back with your eyes shut, not tight shut. You mustn't feel your eyelids. You mustn't feel any part of you at all. You think of nothing, absolutely nothing, not even think. You keep on not feeling, not thinking, not seeing things till the blackness comes in waves, blacker and blacker. That's how it was before. Then the blackness was perfectly still. You couldn't feel your breathing or your heart beating. It's coming all right. Blacker and blacker. It wasn't like this before. This is an awful feeling. Dying must be like this. One thing going after another. Something holding down your heart, stopping its beat. Something holding down your chest, crushing the breath out of it. Don't think about the feeling. Don't feel. Think of the blackness. It isn't the same blackness. There are specks and shreds of light in it. You can't get the light away. Don't think about the blackness and the light. Let everything go except yourself. Hold on to yourself. But you felt yourself going. Going and coming back, gathered together, incredibly free, disentangled from the net of nerves and veins. It didn't move anymore with the movement of the net. It was clear and still in the blackness, intensely real. Then it willed. Yourself willed. It was free to will. You knew that it had never been free before except once. It had never willed before except once. Willing was this. Waves and waves of will coming on, making your will, driving it through empty time. The time of time, that was the self. Time where nothing happens except this. Where nothing happens except God's will. God's will in your will. Self of yourself. Reality of reality. It had felt like that. Mama had waked up. She was saying she was better. Mama was better. She said she felt perfectly well. She could walk across the room. She could walk without your holding her. It couldn't have been that. It couldn't possibly. It was a tiny hemorrhage, and it had dried up. It would have dried up just the same if you hadn't done anything. Those things don't happen. What did happen was extraordinary enough. The queer dying. The freedom afterwards. The intense stillness, the intense energy, the certainty. Something was there. That horrible dream. Dorsey oughtn't to have made me go and see the old woman in the workhouse. A body without a mind. That's what made the dream come. It was Mama's face, but she was doing what the old woman did. Mama, That's the second time I've dreamed Mama was dead. The little lamb, lying on her back with her mouth open, making that funny noise. Cluck cluck, like a hen. Why can't I dream about something I want to happen? Why can't I dream about Richard? Poor Richard, how can he go on believing I shall come to him? Romans 7. Dear Dr. Charles, with his head sticking out between the tubes of the stethoscope, like a ram. His poor old mouth hung loose as he breathed. He was out late last night. There was white stubble on his chin. It won't do it when you want it to. It's doing quite enough. Let me see, it's 2 years since your mother had that illness. You must go away, Mary. For a month at least. Dorsey'll come and take care of your mother. Does it matter where I go? And no. Not so much. Go where you'll get a thorough change, my dear. I wouldn't stay with relations, if I were you. All right, I'll go if you'll tell me what's the matter with me. You've got your brother Rodney's heart. But it won't kill you if you'll take care of yourself. Roddy's heart, the net of flesh and blood drawing in a bit of your body. Roman 33. Richard had gone up into his own flat and left her to wash and dress and explore. He had told her she was to have Tiedeman's flat. Not knowing who Tiedeman was made it more wonderful that God should have put it into his head to go away for Easter and lend you his flat. If you wanted anything, you could ring, and they would come up from the basement and look after you. She didn't want them to come up yet. She wanted to lie back among her cushions where Richard had packed her and turn over the moments and remember what they had been like. Getting out of the train at King's Cross and finding Richard there, coming with him out of the thin white April light into the rich darkness and brilliant colors of the room. The feeling of Richard's hands as they undid her fur stole and peeled the sleeves of her coat from her arms. Seeing him kneel on the hearthrug and make tea with an air of doing something intensely interesting, an air of security and possession. He went about in Tiedeman's rooms as if they belonged to him. She liked Tiedeman's flat, the big outer room, curtained with thick gentian blue and thin violet. There was a bowl of crimson and purple anemones on the dark oval of the oak table. Tiedeman's books covered the walls with their colored bands and stripes and the illuminated gold of their tooling. The deep bookcases made a ledge all round halfway up the wall, and the shallow bookcases went on above it to the ceiling. But those white books on the table were Richard's books. Mary Olivier. My books that I gave him. They're Richard's rooms. She got up and looked about. That long dark thing was her coat, and fur stretched out on the flat couch in the corner where Richard had laid them, stretched out in an absolute peace and rest. She picked them up and went into the inner room that showed through the wide square opening. The small brown oak-paneled room. No furniture but Richard's writing table and his chair. A tall, narrow French window looking to the backs of houses, an opening on a leaded balcony. Spindlewood trees, green balls held up on ramrod stems in green tubs. Richard's garden. Curtains of thin silk, brilliant magenta, letting the light through. The hanging green bough of a plane tree, high up on the pane, between. A worn magenta-ish rug on the dark floor. She went through the door on the right and found a short, narrow passage. Another French window, opening from it onto the balcony. A bathroom on the other side, a small white-paneled bedroom at the end. She had no new gown. Nothing but the black chiffon one, black because of Uncle Victor, she had bought 2 years ago with Richard's check. She had worn it at Greffington that evening when she dined with him. It had a long, pointed train. Its thin, open, wide-spreading sleeves fell from her shoulders in long, pointed wings. It made her feel slender. There was no light in the inner room. Clear, glassy dark twilight behind the tall window. She stood there waiting for Richard to come down. Richard loved all this. He loved beautiful books, beautiful things, beautiful anemone colors, red and purple with the light coming through them, thin silk curtains that let the light through like the thin, silky tissues of flowers. He loved the sooty brown London walls, houses standing back to back, the dark flanks of the back wings jutting out, almost meeting across the trenches of the gardens, making the colors in his rooms brilliant as stained glass. He loved the sound of the street outside, intensifying the quiet of the house. It was the backs that were so beautiful at night. the long straight ranges of the dark walls, the sudden high dark cliffs and peaks of the walls, hollowed out into long galleries filled with thick, burning light, rows on rows of oblong casements opening into the light. Here and there, a tree stood up black in the trenches of the gardens. The tight strain in her mind loosened and melted in the stream of the pure new light, the pure new darkness, the pure new colors. Richard came in. They stood together a long time, looking out. They didn't say a word. Then, as they turned back to the lighted outer room, I thought I was to have had Tideman's flat. Well, he's up another flight of stairs, and the rain makes a row on the skylight. It was simpler to take his and give you mine. I want you to have mine. Roman too. She turned off the electric light and shut her eyes and lay thinking. The violent motion of the express prolonged itself in a ghostly vibration, rocking the bed. In still space, unshaken by this tremor, she could see the other rooms, the quiet, beautiful rooms. I wonder how Mama and Dorsey are getting on. I'm not going to think about Mama. It isn't fair to Richard. I shan't think about anybody but Richard for this fortnight. One evening of it's gone already. It might have lasted quite another hour if he hadn't got up and gone away so suddenly. What a fool I was to let him think I was tired. There will be 13 evenings more. 13. You can stretch time out by doing a lot of things in it, doing something different every hour. When you're with Richard, every minute's different from the last, and he brings you the next all bright and new. Heaven would be like that. Imagine an eternity of heaven, being with Richard forever and ever. But nobody ever did imagine an eternity of heaven. People only talk about it because they can't imagine it. What they mean is that if they had 1 minute of it, they would remember that forever and ever. This is Richard's life. This is what I'd have taken from him if I'd let him marry me. I daren't even think what it would have been like if I'd tried to mix up Mama and Richard in the same house. And poor little Mama in a strange place with nothing about it that she could remember, going up and down in it, trying to get at me, and looking reproachful and disapproving all the time. She'd have to be shut in her own rooms because Richard wouldn't have her in his. Sitting up waiting to be read aloud to, and played Halma with when Richard wanted me. Saying the same things over and over again. Sighing. Richard would go off his head if he heard Mama sigh. He wants to be by himself the whole time, working like blazes. He likes to feel that the very servants are battened down in the basement so that he doesn't know they're there. He couldn't stand Tiedemann and Peters if they weren't doing the same thing. Tiedemann working like blazes in the flat above him, and Peters working like blazes in the flat below. Richard slept in this room last night. He will sleep in it again when I'm gone. She switched the light on to look at it for another second. The privet white paneled cabin, the small wine-colored chest of drawers, the small golden brown wardrobe shining. My hat's in that wardrobe, lying on Richard's waistcoat, fast asleep. If Tiedemann's flat's up there, that's Richard walking up and down over my head. If it rains, there'll be a row on the skylight, and he won't sleep. He isn't sleeping now. Roman 3. It would be much nicer to walk home through Kensington Gardens and Hyde Park. She was glad that they were going to have a quiet evening. After 3 evenings at the play, and Richard ruining himself in hansoms and not sleeping. After this unbelievable afternoon. All those people, those terribly important people. It was amusing to go about with Richard and feel important yourself because you were with him. And to see Richard's ways with them, his nice way of behaving as if he wasn't important in the least, as if it was you they had made all that fuss about. To think that the little dried-up schoolmisterish man was Professor Lee Ramsden, prowling about outside the group, eager and shy, waiting to be introduced to you, nobody taking the smallest notice of him. The woman who had brought him making soft, sentimental eyes at you through the gaps in the group, and trying to push him in a bit nearer. Then Richard asking you to be kind for 1 minute to the poor old thing. It hurt you to see him shy and humble and out of it. And when you thought of his arrogance at Durlingham, it was the women's voices that tired you so, and their nervous, snapping eyes. The best of all was going away from them, quietly, with Richard into Kensington Gardens. Did you like it, Mary? Frightfully. But not half so much as this. Roman 4. She was all alone in the front room, stretched out on the flat couch in the corner facing the door. He was still writing his letter in the inner room. When she heard him move, she would slide her feet to the floor and sit up. She wanted to lie still with her hands over her shut eyes, making the 4 long, delicious days begin again and go on in her head. Richard would take hansoms. You couldn't stop him. Perhaps he was afraid if you walked too far you would drop down dead. When it was all over, your soul would still drive about London in a hansom for ever and ever, through blue and gold rain-sprinkled days, through poignant white evenings, through the streaming, steep, brown-purple darkness, and the streaming flat, thin gold of the wet nights. They were not going to have any more tiring parties. There wasn't enough time. When she opened her eyes, he was sitting on the chair by the foot of the couch, leaning forward, looking at her. She saw nothing but his loose, hanging hands and straining eyes. Oh, Richard, what time is it? She swung her feet to the floor and sat up suddenly. Only 9. Only 9. The evening's nearly gone. Is that why you aren't sleeping, Richard? I didn't know. I didn't know I was hurting you. What did you think? What did you think? Isn't it hurting you? May. I've got used to it. I was so happy just being with you. So happy and so quiet that I thought you didn't care. Well, what was I to think? If you won't marry me. That's because I care so frightfully. Don't let's rake that up again. Well, there it is. She thought, I've no business to come here to his rooms, turning him out, making him so wretched that he can't sleep. No business. Unless. And we've got to go on living with it, he said. He thinks I haven't the courage. I can't tell him. Yes, she said, there it is. Why shouldn't I tell him? We've only 10 days. As long as I'm here, nothing matters but Richard. If I keep perfectly still like this, if I don't say a word, he'll think of it. Richard, would you rather I hadn't come? No. You remember the evening I came, you got up so suddenly and left me. What did you do that for? Because if I'd stayed another minute, I couldn't have left you at all. He stood up. And you're only going now because you can't see that I'm not a coward. This wouldn't last, the leaping and knocking of her heart, the eyelids screwing themselves tight, the jerking of her nerves at every sound. At the 2 harsh, rattling screams of the curtain rings along the pole, at the light click of the switches. Only the small, green-shaded lamp, still burning on Richard's writing table in the inner room. She could hear him moving about, softly and secretly, in there. He was Richard. That was Richard, moving about in there. Richard thought his flat was a safe place. But it wasn't. People creeping up the stairs every minute and standing still to listen. People would come and try the handle of the door. They won't, dear. Nobody ever comes in. It has never happened. It isn't going to happen now. Yet you couldn't help thinking that just this night it would happen. She thought that Peters knew. He wouldn't come out of his door till you had turned the corner of the stairs. She thought the woman in the basement knew. She remembered the evening at Greffington, Baxter's pinched mouth and his eyes sliding sideways to look at you. She knew now what Baxter had been thinking. The woman's look was the female of Baxter's. As if that could hurt you. Romans 6. Mary, do you know you're growing younger every minute? I shall go on growing younger and younger till it's all over. Till what's all over? This. So will you, Richard. Not in the same way. My hair isn't young anymore. My face isn't young anymore. I don't want it to be young. It wasn't half so nice a face when it was young. Some other woman loved it when it was young. Yes. Another woman loved it when it was young. Is she alive and going about? Oh yes, she's alive and she goes about a lot. Does she love you now? I suppose she does. I wish she didn't. You needn't mind her, Mary. She was never anything to me. She never will be. But I do mind her. I mind her awfully. I can't bear to think of her going about and loving you. She's no business to. Why do I mind her loving you more than I'd mind your loving her? Because you like loving more than being loved. How do you know? I know every time I hold you in my arms. There have been other women then, or he wouldn't know the difference. There must have been a woman that he loved. I don't care. It wasn't the same thing. What are you thinking? I'm thinking nothing was ever the same thing as this. No. Whatever we do, Mary, we mustn't go back on it. If we could have done anything else. But I can't see. It's not as if it could last long. Nothing lasts long. Life doesn't last long. He sounded as if he were sorry, as if already in his mind he had gone back on it. After 3 days. You're not sorry, Richard. Only when I think of you. The awful risks I've made you take. Can't you see I like risks? I always have liked risks. When we were children, my brothers and I were always trying to see just how near we could go to breaking our necks. I know you've courage enough for anything. But that was rather a different sort of risk. No. No. There are no different sorts of risk. All intense moments of danger are the same. It's always the same feeling. I don't know whether I've courage or not, but I do know that when danger comes you don't care. You're hoisted up above caring. You do care, Mary. About my reputation. You wouldn't like to think I didn't care about it. Of course, I care frightfully. If I didn't, where's the risk? I hate your having to take it all. I don't risk anything. I wish you did. Then you'd be happier. Poor Richard's so safe in his man's world. You can be sorry about that if you like. But not about me. I shall never be sorry. Nothing in this world can make me sorry. I shouldn't like Mama to know about it. But even Mama couldn't make me sorry. I've always been happy about the things that matter, the real things. I hate people who sneak and snivel about real things. People who have doubts about God and don't like them and snivel. I had doubts about God once, and they made me so happy I could hardly bear it. Mama couldn't bear it making me happy. She wouldn't have minded half so much if I had been sorry and sniveled. She wouldn't mind so much if I was sorry and sniveled about this. You said you weren't going to think about your mother. I'm not thinking about her. I'm thinking about how happy I have been, and shall be. Even thinking about Mama couldn't hurt you now. Nothing could hurt the happiness you shared with Richard. What it was now, it would always be. Pure and remorseless. Romans 7. Delicious, warm, shining day. She had her coat and hat on ready to go down with him. The hansom stood waiting in the street. They were looking up the place on the map when the loud double knock came. That's for Peters. He's always getting wires. If we don't go today, we shall never go. We've only got 5 more now. The long, soft rapping on the door of the room. Knuckles rapping out their warning. You can't say I don't give you time. Richard took the orange envelope. It's for you, Mary. Oh, Richard, come at once. Mother ill, Dorsey. She would catch the 10 train. That was what the hansom was there for. I'll send your things on after you. The driver and the slogging horse knew that she would catch the train. Richard knew. He had the same look on his face that was there before when Mama was ill. Sorrow that wasn't sorrow. And the same clear thought behind it. Roman 34. Dorsey's nerves were in a shocking state. You could see she had been afraid all the time, from the first day when Mama had kept on saying, "Has Mary come back?" Dorsey was sure that was how it began, but she couldn't tell you whether it was before or afterwards that she had forgotten the days of the week. Anybody could forget the days of the week. What frightened Dorsey was hearing her say suddenly, "Mary's gone." She said it to herself when she didn't know Dorsey was in the room. Then she had left off asking and wondering. For 5 days, she hadn't said anything about you. Not anything at all. When she heard your name, she stared at them with a queer, scared look. Caddy said that yesterday she had begun to be afraid of Dorsey and couldn't bear her in the room. That was what made them send the wire. What had she been thinking of those 5 days? It was as though she knew. Dorsey said she didn't believe she was thinking anything at all. Dorsey didn't know. Roman 2. Somebody knew. Somebody had been talking. She had found Caddy in the room, making up the bed for her in the corner. Caddy was crying as she tucked in the blankets. There's some people, she said, as had ought to be poisoned. but she wouldn't say why she was crying. You could tell by Mr. Belk's face, his mouth drawn in between claws of nose and chin. By Mrs. Belk's face and her busy eyes staring. By the old men sitting on the bench at the corner, their eyes coming together as you passed. And Mr. Spencer Rowlett, stretching himself straight and looking away over your head and drawing in his breath with a fivvvvv when he asked how Mama was. His thoughts were hidden behind his bare, wooden face. He was a just and cautious man. He wouldn't accept any statement outside the Bible without proof. You had to go down and talk to Mrs. Wha? She had come to see how you would look. Her mouth talked about Mama, but her face was saying all the time, "I'm not going to ask you what you were doing in London in Mr. Nicholson's flat, Mary. I'm sure you wouldn't do anything you'd be sorry to think of with your poor mother in the state she's in. I don't care. I don't care what they think." There would still be Caddy and Dorsey, and Louisa Wright, and Miss Kendall and Dr. Charles, with their kind eyes that loved you. And Richard living his eternal life in your heart. And Mama would never know. Roman 3. Mama was going backwards and forwards between the open work table and the cabinet. She was taking out the ivory reels and thimbles and button boxes, wrapping them in tissue paper and hiding them in the cabinet. When she had locked the doors, she waited till you weren't looking to lift up her skirt and hide the key in her petticoat pocket. She was happy, like a busy child at play. She was never ill, only tired like a child that plays too long. Her face was growing smooth and young and pretty again, a pink flush under her eyes. She would never look disapproving or reproachful anymore. She couldn't listen anymore when you read aloud to her. She had forgotten how to play Helma. One day, she found the green box in the cabinet drawer. She came to you carrying it with care. When she had put it down on the table, she lifted the lid and looked at the little green and white pawns and smiled. "Roddy soldiers," she said. "Richard doesn't know what he's talking about when he asks me to give up Mama. He might as well ask me to give up my child. It's no use his saying she isn't there. Any minute she may come back and remember and know me. She must have known me yesterday when she asked me to go and see what Papa was doing. As for waiting, he may have to wait years and years. And I'm 45 now." Roman 4. The round black eye of the mirror looked at them. Their figures would be there, hers and Richard's, at the bottom of the black crystal bowl, small like the figures in the wrong end of a telescope, very clear in the deep clear swirl of the glass. They were sitting close together on the old rose chintz-covered couch. Her couch. You could see him putting the cushions at her back, tucking the wide Victorian skirt in close about the feet in the black velvet slippers. And she would lie there with her poor hands folded in the white cashmere shawl. Richard knew what you were thinking. "You can't expect me," he was saying, "to behave like my uncle. Besides, it's a little too late, isn't it? We said whatever we did we wouldn't go back on it. If it wasn't wrong then, Mary, it isn't wrong now." "It isn't that, Richard." "No. Not that. Pure and remorseless then. Pure and remorseless now." She wondered whether he had heard it. The crunching on the gravel walk under the windows, stopping suddenly when the feet stepped onto the grass. And the hushed growl of the men's voices. Baxter and the gardener. They had come to see whether the light would go out again behind the yellow blinds as it had gone out last night. If you were a coward, if you had wanted to get off scot-free, it was too late. Richard knows I'm not a coward. Funk wouldn't keep me from him. It isn't that. What is it then? Can't you see, can't you feel that it's no use coming again just for this? It'll never be what it was then. It'll always be like last night, and you'll think I don't care. Something's holding me back from you. Something that's happened to me. I don't know yet what it is. Nerves. Nothing but nerves. No. I thought it was nerves last night. I thought it was this room. Those two poor ghosts looking at us. I even thought it might be Mark and Roddy, all of them tugging at me to get me away from you. But it isn't that. It's something in me. You're trying to tell me you don't want me. I'm trying to tell you what happened. I did want you all last year. It was so awful that I had to stop it. You couldn't go on living like that. I willed and willed not to want you. So did I. All the willing in the world couldn't stop me. It isn't that sort of willing. You might go on all your life like that, and nothing would happen. You have to find it out for yourself, and even that might take you all your life. It isn't the thing people call willing at all. It's much queerer. Awfully queer. How queer? Oh, the sort of queerness you don't like talking about. I'm sorry, Mary. You seem to be talking about something, but I haven't the faintest notion what it is. But you can make yourself believe anything you like if you keep on long enough. No. Half the time I'm doing it, I don't believe it'll come off. But it always does. Every time it's the same. Every time, exactly as if something had happened. Poor Mary. But Richard, it makes you absolutely happy. That's the queer part of it. It's how you know. Know what? He was angry. That there's something there. That it's absolutely real. Real? Why not? If it makes you happy, without the thing you care most for in the whole world. There must be something there. It must be real. Real in a way that nothing else is. You aren't happy now, he said. No. And you're with me. And I care for you more than anything in the whole world. I thought you said that was all over. No. It's only just begun. I can't say I see it. You'll see it all right soon. When you've gone. V. It was no use not marrying him, no use sending him away, as long as he was tied to you by his want. You had no business to be happy. It wasn't fair. There was he, tied to you tighter than if you had married him. And there you were in your inconceivable freedom. Supposing you could give him the same freedom, the same happiness. Supposing you could work it for him, make it, whatever it was, reach out and draw him into your immunity, your peace. Romans 6. Whatever it was there. You could doubt away yourself and Richard, but you couldn't doubt away it. It might leave you for a time, but it came back. It came back. Its going only intensified the wonder of its return. You might lose all sense of it between its moments, but the thing was certain while it lasted. Doubt it away, and still what had been done for you lasted. Done for you once for all, 2 years ago. And that wasn't the first time. Even supposing you could doubt away the other times you might have made the other things happen by yourself. But not that. Not giving Richard up and still being happy. That was something you couldn't possibly have done yourself. Or you might have done it in time, might have done it for you but not like that, all at once, making that incredible, supernatural happiness and peace out of nothing at all, in one night, and going on in it without Richard. Richard himself didn't believe it was possible. He simply thought it hadn't happened. Still, even then, you might have said it didn't count so long as it was nothing but your private adventure. But not now, never again now when it had happened to Richard. His letter didn't tell you whether he thought there was anything in it. He saw the queerness of it and left it there. Something happened that night after you'd gone. You know how I felt. I couldn't stop wanting you. My mind was tied to you and couldn't get away. Well, that night something let go quite suddenly. Something went. It's a year ago and it hasn't come back. I didn't know what on earth you meant by not wanting and still caring, but I think I see now. I don't want you anymore and I care more than ever. Don't work like blazes, still I'm glad you like it. I can get you any amount of the same thing more than you'll care to do. Romans 7. He didn't know how hard it was to work like blazes. You had to keep your eyes ready all the time to see what Mama was doing. You had to take her up and downstairs, holding her lest she should turn dizzy and fall. If you left her a minute, she would get out of the room, out of the house and on to the green by herself and be frightened. Mama couldn't remember the garden. She looked at her flowers with dislike. You had brought her on a visit to a strange, disagreeable place and left her there. She was angry with you because she couldn't get away. Then suddenly, for whole hours she would be good, a child playing its delicious game of goodness. When Dr. Charles came in and you took him out of the room to talk about her, you would tell her to sit still until you came back. And she would smile, the sweet, serious smile of a child that is being trusted, and sit down on the parrot chair. And when you came back, you would find her sitting there, still smiling to herself because she was so good. Why do I love her now when she is like this when this is what I was afraid of, what I thought I could not bear? Why do I love her more, if anything, now than I've ever done before? Why am I happier now than I've ever been before, except in the times when I was writing and the times when I was with Richard? Roman 8. 45. Yesterday she was 45, and today. Tomorrow she would be 46. She had come through the dreadful, dangerous year without thinking of it, and nothing had happened. Nothing at all. She couldn't imagine why she had ever been afraid of it. She could hardly remember what being afraid of it had felt like. Aunt Charlotte, Uncle Victor. If I were going to be mad, I should have gone mad long ago, when Roddy came back, when Mark died, when I sent Richard away. I should be mad now. It was getting worse. In the cramped room where the big bed stuck out from the wall to within a yard of the window, Mama went about, small and weak, in her wadded lavender Japanese dressing gown, like a child that can't sit still, looking for something it wants that nobody can find. You couldn't think because of the soft pad of the dreaming, sleepwalking feet in the lamb's wool slippers. When you weren't looking, she would slip out of the room onto the landing to the head of the stairs, and stand there, vexed and bewildered when you caught her. Roman 9. Mama was not well enough now to get up and be dressed. They had moved her into Papa's room. It was bright all morning with the sun. She was happy there. She remembered the yellow furniture. She was back in the old bedroom at 5 Elms. Mama lay in the big bed, waiting for you to brush her hair. She was playing with her white flannel dressing jacket, spread out before her on the counterpane, ready. She talked to herself. Lindley Vickers Lindley. But she was not thinking of Lindley Vickers. She was thinking of Dan trying to get back to Dan. Is Jenny there? Tell her to go and see what Master Roddy's doing. She thought Caddy was Jenny. Has Dan come in? Sometimes it would be Papa, but not often. She soon left him for Dan and Roddy. Always Dan and Roddy. And never Mark. Never Mark and never Mary. Had she forgotten Mark, or did she remember him too well? Or was she afraid to remember? Supposing there was a black hole in her mind where Mark's death was, and another black hole where Mary had been. Had she always held you together in her mind so that you went down together? Did she hold you together now, in some time and place safer than memory? She was still playing with the dressing jacket. She smoothed it and patted it and folded it up and laid it beside her on the bed. She took up her pocket handkerchief and shook it out and folded it and put it on the top of the dressing jacket. What are you doing, you darling? Going to bed. She looked at you with a half-happy, half-frightened smile because you had found her out. She was putting out the baby clothes, ready. Serious and pleased and frightened. Who will take care of my little children when I'm laid aside? She knew what she was lying in the big bed for. It was really bedtime. She was sitting up in the armchair while Caddy, who was Jenny, made her bed. The long white sheet lay smooth and flat on the high mattress. It hung down on the floor. Mama was afraid of the white sheet. She wouldn't go back to bed. There's a coffin on the bed. Somebody's died of cholera, she said. Cholera? That was what she thought Mark had died of. She knows who I am now. Richard had written to say he was married. On the 25th of February. That was just 10 days after Mama died. We've known each other the best part of our lives. So you see, it's a very sober, middle-aged affair. He had married the woman who loved him when he was young. A very sober, middle-aged affair. Not what it would have been if you and he didn't want you to think that that would ever happen again. He wanted you to see that with him and you it had been different, that you had loved him and lived with him in that other time he had made for you where you were always young. He had only made it for you. She, poor thing, would have to put up with other people's time that made them middle-aged, made them old. You had got to write and tell him you were glad. You had got to tell him Mama died 10 days ago. And he would say to himself, if I'd waited another 10 days, there was nothing he could say to you. That was why he didn't write again. There was nothing to say. Roman 35. She would never get used to the house. She couldn't think why she had been such a fool as to take it. On a 7 years lease, too, it would feel like being in prison for 7 years. That was the worst of moving about for a whole year in boats and trains, and staying at hotels. It gave you an unnatural longing to settle down in a place of your own undying lust of possession. If you had to have things, why a house? Why 6 rooms when 2 would have done as well and left you your freedom? After all that ecstasy of space, that succession of heavenly places with singing names, Carcassonne and Vézelay, Rome and Florence and San Gimignano, Marseille and Arles and Avignon, filling up time, stretching it out, making a long life out of 1 year. If you could go moving on, and on while time stood still. Oh, this damned house. It would be you sitting still while time tore by, as it used to tear by at Morph before Richard came, and in the 3 years after he had gone, when Mama. Roman 2. It was rather attractive, when you turned the corner and came on it suddenly, flat-roofed and small, clean white and innocent. The spring twilight gave it that look of being somewhere in Italy, the look that made you fall in love with it at first sight. As for not getting used to it, that was precisely the effect she wanted, rooms that wouldn't look like anything in the house at Morph, things that she would always come on with a faint, exquisite surprise. The worn magenta-ish rug on the dark polished floor, the oak table, the gentian blue chair, the thin magenta curtains letting the light through. The things Richard had given her because in their beginning they had been meant for her. Richard knew that you were safe from unhappiness, that you had never once gone back on it, if you could be happy with his things. He had thought, too, that if you had a house you would settle down and work. You would have to work like blazes, after spending all the money Aunt Charlotte left you on rushing about, and half the money Aunt Lavie left you on settling down. It was horrible, this, living on other people's deaths. Roman 3. Caddy couldn't bear it being so different. You could see she thought you were unfaithful not to have kept the piano when Mama had played on it. Caddy's faithfulness was unsurpassable. She had wanted to marry Blencairn, the stonemason at Morph, but first she wouldn't because of Mama, and then she wouldn't because of Miss Mary. When you told her to go back and marry him at once, she would only laugh and say, "There's your husband, and there's your children. You're my child, Miss Mary. Master Roddy was Jenny's child, and you was always mine." You were only 10 years younger than Caddy, but like Richard, she couldn't see that you were old. You would never know whether Caddy knew about Richard, or whether Dorsey knew. Whatever you did, they would love you, Caddy because you were her child, and Dorsey because you were Mark's sister. Roman 4. The sun had been shining for a fortnight. She could sit out all day now in the garden. It was nonsense to talk about time standing still if you kept on moving. Just now in the garden, when the light came through the thin green silk leaves of the lime tree, for a moment, while she sat looking at the lime tree, time stood still. Caddy had taken away the tea things and was going down the 4 steps into the house. It happened between the opening and shutting of the door. She saw that the beauty of the tree was its real life, and that its real life was in her real self, and that her real self was God. The leaves and the light had nothing to do with it. She had seen it before when the tree was a stem and bare branches on a gray sky, and that beauty too was the real life of the tree. If she could only dream about Mark. But if she dreamed about any of them, it was always Mama. She had left her in the house by herself, and she had got out of her room to the stairhead. Or they were in London at the crossing by the bank, and Mama was frightened. She had to get her through the thick of the traffic. The horses pushed at Mama, and you tried to hold back their noses, but she sank down and slid away from you sideways under the wheel. Or she would come into this room and find her in it. At first she would be glad to see that Mama was still there, then she would be unhappy and afraid. She would go on to a clear thought. If Mama was still there, then she had got back somehow to Morph. The old life was still going on, it had never really stopped. But if that was real, then this was not real. Her secure, shining life of last year and now wasn't real. Nothing could make it real. Her exquisite sense of it was not real. She had only thought it had happened. Nothing had happened but what had happened before. It was happening now. It would go on till it frightened you, till you could not bear it. When she woke up, she was glad that the dream had been nothing but a dream. But that meant that you were glad Mama was not there. The dream showed you what you were hiding from yourself. Supposing the dead knew. Supposing Mama knew, and Mark knew that you were glad. Romans 6. It came to her at queer times, in queer ways. After that horrible evening at the dining club, when the secretary woman put her as far as possible from Richard, next to the little Jew financier who smelt of wine. She couldn't even hear what Richard was saying. The little wine-lapping Jew went on talking about women's suffrage and his collection of Fragonards and his wife's portrait by Sargent. His tongue slid between one overhanging and one dropping jaw, in and out like a shuttle. She tried not to hate him, not to shrink back from his puffing, wine-sour breath, to be kind to him and listen and smile and remember that his real secret self was God and was holy, not to attend to Richard's voice breaking the beat of her heart. She had gone away before Richard could get up and come to her. She wanted to be back in her house by herself. She had pushed open the French windows of the study to breathe the air of the garden and see the tall sycamore growing deep into the thick blue night. Half the room, reflected on the long pane, was thrown out into the garden. She saw it thinning away, going off from the garden into another space, existing there with an unearthly reality of its own. She had sat down at last, too tired to go upstairs, and had found herself crying, incredibly crying. All the misery, all the fear, all the boredom of her life gathered together and discharging now. If I could get out of it all, her crying stopped with a start, as if somebody had come in and put a hand on her shoulder. Everything went still. She had a sense of happiness and peace suddenly there with her in the room. Not so much her own as the happiness and peace of an immense, invisible, intangible being of whose life she was thus aware. She knew, somehow through it, that there was no need to get away. She was out of it all now, this minute. There was always a point where she could get out of it, and into this enduring happiness and peace. Romans 7. They were talking tonight about Richard and his wife. They said he wasn't happy, he wasn't in love with her. He never had been, she knew it. Yet she took him and tied him to her, an old woman, older than Richard with gray hair. Oh, well, she had had to wait for him longer than he waited for me, and she's in love with him still. She's making it impossible for him to see me. Then I shan't see him. I don't want him to see me if it hurts her. I don't want her to be hurt. I wonder if she knows. They know. I can hear them talking about me when I've gone. Mary Olivier, the woman who translated Euripides. Mary Olivier, the woman Nicholson discovered. Mary Olivier, the woman who was Nicholson's mistress. Richard's mistress, I know that's what they say, but I can't feel that they're saying it about me. It must be somebody else, some woman I never heard of. Roman 8. Mr. Sutcliffe is dead. He died 2 weeks ago at Agay. I can see now how beautiful they were. How beautiful he was, going away like that, letting her take him away so that the sight of me shouldn't hurt her. I can see that what I thought so ugly was really beautiful. They're sticking to each other through it all, his faithfulness and her forgiveness, their long life of faithfulness and forgiveness. But my short life with Richard was beautiful too, my coming to him and leaving him free. I shall never go back on that, I shall never be sorry for it. The things I'm sorry for are not caring more for Papa, being unkind to Mama, not doing enough for her, not knowing what she was really like. I'd give anything to have been able to think about her as Mark thought, to feel about her as he felt. If only I had known what she was really like. Even now I don't know. I never shall. But going to Richard, no. If it was to be done again, tomorrow I'd do it. And I don't humbug myself about it. If I made Richard happy, I made myself happy too. He made me happy. Still, if I had had no happiness in it, if I'd hated it, I'd have done it for Richard all the same. Roman 9. All this religious resignation. And the paradox of prayer. People praying 1 minute, "Thy will be done," then praying for things to happen or not happen, just as they please. God's will be done as, if it wouldn't be done whatever they did or didn't do. God's will was your fate. The thing was to know it, and not waste your strength in the illusion of resistance. If you were part of God, your will was God's will at the moment when you really willed. There was always a point when you knew it, the flash point of freedom. You couldn't mistake your flash when it came. You couldn't doubt away that certainty of freedom any more than you could doubt away the certainty of necessity and determination. From the outside, they were part of the show of existence. the illusion of separation from God. From the inside, they were God's will, the way things were willed. Free will was the reality underneath, the illusion of necessity. The flashpoint of freedom was your consciousness of God. Then praying would be willing. There would be no such thing as passive prayer. There could be no surrender. And yet there was. Not the surrender of your will, but of all the things that entangle and confuse it, that stand between it and you, between God and you. When you lay still with your eyes shut and made the darkness come on, wave after wave, blotting out your body and the world, blotting out everything but yourself and your will, that was a dying to live. A real dying, a real life. The Christians got hold of real things and turned them into something unreal, impossible to believe. The grace of God was a real thing. It was that miracle of perfect happiness, with all its queerness, its divine certainty and uncertainty. The Christians knew at least one thing about it. They could see it had nothing to do with deserving. But it had nothing to do with believing, either, or with being good and getting into heaven. It was heaven. It had to do with beauty, absolutely unmoral beauty, more than anything else. She couldn't see the way of it beyond that. It had come to her when she was a child in brilliant, clear flashes. It had come again and again in her adolescence, with more brilliant and clearer flashes. Then, after leaving her for 23 years, it had come like this streaming in and out of her till its ebb and flow were the rhythm of her life. Why hadn't she known that this would happen, instead of being afraid that she would go like Aunt Charlotte or Uncle Victor? People talked a lot about compensation, but nobody told you that after 45 life would have this exquisite clearness and intensity. Why, since it could happen when you were young reality breaking through, if only in flashes coming and going altogether and forgotten why, had you to wait so long before you could remember it and be aware of it as one continuous, shining background. She had never been aware of it before. She had only thought about and about it, about substance, the thing in itself, reality, God. Thinking was not being aware. She made it out more and more. For 23 years, something had come between her and reality. She could see what it was now. She had gone through life wanting things, wanting people, clinging to the thought of them, not able to keep off them and let them go. All her life she had gone wrong about happiness. She had attached it to certain things and certain people. Mama and Mark Jenny, visits to Aunt Bella, the coming of Aunt Charlotte and Aunt Lavie and Uncle Victor, the things people would say and do which they had not said and not done. When she was older, she had attached it to Morris Jourdain and to Mark Still and Mama, to going back to Mama after Dover, to the unknown houses in Morph, to Morris Jourdain's coming, then to Mark's coming, to Lindley Vickers. And in the end, none of these things had brought her the happiness she had seemed to foresee in them. She knew only one thing about perfect happiness. It didn't hide. It didn't wait for you behind unknown doors. There were little happinesses, pleasures that came like that. The pleasure of feeling good when you sat with Maggie's sister. The pleasure of doing things for Mama or Dorsey, all the pleasures that had come through the Sutcliffes. The Sutcliffes went, and yet she had been happy. They had all gone, and yet she was happy. If you looked back on any perfect happiness, you saw that it had not come from the people or the things you thought it had come from, but from somewhere inside yourself. When you attached it to people and things, they ceased for that moment to be themselves. The space they then seemed to inhabit was not their own space. The time of the wonderful event was not their time. They became part of the kingdom of God within you. Not Richard. He had become part of the kingdom of God without ceasing to be himself. That was because she had loved him more than herself. Loving him more than herself, she had let him go. Letting go had somehow done the trick. I used to think there was nothing I couldn't give up for Richard. Could I give up this? If I had to choose between losing Richard and losing this, I suppose it would be generally considered that I had lost Richard. If I had had to choose 7 years ago, before I knew I'd have chosen Richard, I couldn't have helped myself. But if I had to choose now, knowing what reality is between losing Richard in the way I have lost him and losing reality, absolutely and forever, losing, absolutely and forever, my real self, knowing that I'd lost it. If there's anything in it at all, losing my real self would be losing Richard. Losing Richard's real self absolutely, and forever. Knowing reality is knowing that you can't lose it. That or nothing. Roman 12. Supposing there isn't anything in it. Supposing. Last night I began thinking about it again. I stripped my soul. I opened all the windows and let my ice-cold thoughts in on the poor thing. It stood shivering between certainty and uncertainty. I tried to doubt away this ultimate passion, and it turned my doubt into its own exquisite sting, the very thrill of the adventure. Supposing there's nothing in it, nothing at all. That's the risk you take. Roman 13. There isn't any risk. This time it was clear as the black pattern the sycamore makes on the sky. If it never came again, I should remember. The end.